Started now. Lovely. Okay, so first of all, notice of recording. This meeting is being recorded for live and subsequent broadcast on the council website. Members of the public, the press may take photographs or record parts of the meeting, except where there are confidential or exempt items. We've got apologies today from Councillor Ian Ward, hence he's stuck with me for the next 4 hours. We've also got Ian McLeod has sent apologies, but I think Bill Edwards is here for him, Julia Martin and Ron Mohammed, and Alex Phillips as well. And Suzanne Dodd has sent apologies. There's a is substitute today. Are there any declarations of interest for anything on today's agenda? Seeing any hands, but feel free to stick a hand up if something will run later in the meeting. There's only one exempt item today, I believe. Is anybody wanting to make any discussions on that exempt item that might affect the decision to be made? Ask for any clarification on it. It's for item 24, appendix 3. Thank God for that. Could be a long one anyway. Lovely. So we'll take that when we come to it, make a decision in the public. Before we get to the papers, I just wanted to put on thanks on record. I think we should record our thanks to Councillor Kate Booth, who has served in the Cabinet for the last few years, and for all the service she has given to decided to step down from the Cabinet since our last meeting. I think we should place on record our thanks to her for her service over the 3 years she has been in Cabinet. Right, it is a long agenda item today, or a long agenda today, so I'm going to ask, do forgive me if I can't think of lovely questions. We have an awful lot to get through. We are scheduled to run through till 2 o'clock, so how quickly we get there depends very much on how much people want to say and ask. I've had a request to move item 6 first, the financial monitoring report, quarter 1, so that then that follows with the medium-term financial plan. If everyone's okay with that, I will turn to Councillor Sheffield first, the financial monitoring report.
Thank you, Chair. So the financial monitoring report up to the 30th of June does indicate an initial overspend of approximately 27.4 million, made up of a revenue position of 17.4 that is largely dependent upon 2.6 million in neighbourhoods relating to homelessness, 3.4 in education, and then a slight position on adult social care. I would just say, if I can, that we are confident that we have enough time within the financial year to pull back this position. It's not unusual to have a overspend, and if their interest, it makes up it represents approximately 3% of our controllable budget. So it is, whilst a large sum in cash terms, it is a relatively low number in percentage terms. And obviously we are working to squeeze this out through all the processes you'd expect through the executive management team and through the staff chamber process, as we have done in previous years. There are some adjustments that go beyond the revenue budget. I think it's probably worth just picking up. 5.4 million due to a shortfall in local tax support, 7 million for the inflation cost related to pay increase for our staff. I'm sure most welcome a pay increase for our staff at 1.5%, and that represents approximately £7 million. And obviously, government have made their position clear; they're not funding increase to council employees, so we will have to find that money for ourselves. And then 5 million of establishment savings that are flagged currently as undeliverable. I think that covers all the major points, Chair. As you said, try to keep the meeting relatively tight, so I will stop there and take any questions. Oh, sorry, I should have to also add, I've overlooked it. We have an addendum as well that I need to move at this point as well, and we should have been made well, that relates to an increase in funding of some £5.1 million for the SEND service. I'm sure everyone's aware of the inspection report into SEND, the need to fund properly the improvement process within that service, and therefore, as a matter of urgency, we are committing that additional £5 million into that service, assuming it's agreed today.
Thank you. Apologies, I should have flagged the addendum. So, the avoidance of doubt, the addendum is up on CMIS and it adds an extra recommendation under 2.9. Just making sure everyone's got hold of that. Right, any questions or comments? Councillor Mackie, Councillor Alden, Councillor Hunt.
Actually, the first question just on that 500 million is where is that coming from? I presume it's coming from the reserves, but that's the first one there. Trade waste, I noticed there's a shortfall of 400k due to losing a major contract, and I was quite interested in knowing when was the last time the trade waste service actually met its income targets. I think shortage in trade waste seems to be quite a common message that comes forward, and I'm not totally surprised. I mean, during the strikes that we had, a lot of restaurants that were in my ward at the time would come on. They were very disappointed that their feeling that they'd be abandoned, that whatever spare capacity was being sent to residents' houses and for restaurants, etc. Environmental health issues that come with that, where if they're being told their waste is not being collected, because they had to get private contractors in. When they contacted the council to say, look, I'm having to get private contractors to come in and take the waste, they were just told to contract and what we can do about it, which they applied to me was, well, okay, but when I'm not on the contract, I'm going to look elsewhere. So I think that there may be some pitches coming under roost there, that's correct, Grace. And there was a second item that I was just really looking for a clarification on the waste vehicle garage. So that's service there is forecasting income shortfall of 0.8 million. That's due to a reduced client base compounded by servicing arrangements for a new grounds maintenance fleet moving external, I think is what it says. And is this garage in the CAS, and what impact does this have on income overall? And the other question I was really going to ask was, does this mean that the grounds maintenance vehicle is moving to an external contractor to get serviced, or really just a clarification around that line really as well as looking for? No, that's me.
Thank you. I'm not entirely sure they were finance questions, so I'll bring in Councillor Shea in a moment to answer some of those, if that's okay. Councillor Alden.
Thank you very much. I'll try to avoid too much repetition. Councillor Chapter has already touched on about the fact about 43% of the savings are what's on track at the moment, so I won't go any further into that. Yes, pick that issue up. On page 24, it picks up, it's one of many places where it picks up around the issue that happened to rephase a number of capital works, and also the fact that there's been an increase in costs. Can we just get what is the overall impact therefore of all of the increased costs from the increase of building and costs of both referenced here, and we all know anyway from just seeing what's happening at the moment in the world. Councillor Mackey's already touched on the waste vehicle garage, so I won't pick up that, but it is interesting that it would appear the service that was brought in-house has decided to use an external repair service rather than the internal repair service that was used prior to it being in-house. Turning to the SEN service, under 4.14 on page 18, that picks up the request for an extra $1 million in drawdown immediately, and that being in September. How much of that $1 million being drawn down now is going towards the cost of the new interim posts that are being recruited within that department? Then turning to the Appendix 1, again, Councillor Chatfield touched on the fact that under neighbourhoods there's an additional cost of 2.64 million, but he didn't mention it's for an estimated claims from external contractors. Can you just get some more explanations to what those claims external contractors are taking against the council? And then under corporately managed budgets, there's a dividends line of 7.47 million that's now at risk. Can we get some explanations as to what that actually relates to? If it relates to the air, then surely that was known about at the setting of the budget. So already ought to have been accounted in the budget rather than now being a slippage at this point. And if it doesn't relate to the airport, does it relate to income we meant to be receiving from the hotels via top?
Thank you. Councillor Hunt.
Thank you. Can I just pick up this addendum on the SEN funding? First of all, it appears to be a really significant increase in funding that's needed for this service in the wake of a very poor report into the service. That's actually quite incredible budget increase from 1.8 million to 7.6 million. First question is to the Cabinet member and maybe the order of the agenda. explains the answer to this. Is that going to be reflected in changes to the medium-term financial plan comes next? That's a significant extra pressure on the council. Secondly, just merely to reinforce that comment about how either understaffed or underperforming the service must have been, that the council is required to increase its budget by a factor of about 4 this year, and similarly going forward. It is incredible that it was so out of kilter up to now. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Do you want to come in first? I'll bring Councillor O'Shea on some of the waste items as well.
The 5.1 million to spend comes from the financial resilience reserve this year, which is set aside reserve for unexpected costs that meet the criteria for that. And in future years, both John and you, it will have to be reflected in the MTFP. It will effectively be a budget uplift for that service, and that will have to be reflected properly in the MTFP. In terms of both trade waste deficit and garage deficit, I'll bring in Councillor Shea if I can on those. That's all right. I'll take them in rough order. So in terms of material costs, I think it's very much dependent on individual projects and building up a bit. So we have to collate all the information from individual capital projects. Obviously, there are a large number, and as Councillor Warden did say, we all are aware that there are some significant headwinds approaching us in terms of building contractor costs, partly because of an overheated sector as HS2 and various other very large-scale national projects, but also simply a reflection of issues like Brexit and the sort of economic turbulence caused by COVID as well. So there's a lot of headwinds on costs that are being reflected through. Although I have to say some of our projects have done an incredibly good job of making sure they get upstream in terms of pre-order materials, etc., which does help manage those costs, obviously, as best they can. But we'll get more, I can get more information on that. Again, I think that's something that's monitored on an ongoing and active basis. The 1 million for send, I'll have to get exact figures in terms of how much of that's gone into interim and how much has gone on other areas of improvement, because obviously you're right. In terms of, and I can't refer to it, it is a significant increase in budget we're looking at. There was already a small improvement programme in place, This is obviously significant ramping up of that improvement programme as reflected by the additional revenue. The only slightly critical point I'll make on that is that given the choices we've had to make as a result of a decade or more of austerity, it is not surprising that individual service areas get squeezed. And I know Councillor Mackie will no doubt be sceptical on that claim. However, it is a simple fact of life that we have a Conservative government that has inflicted a level of austerity this country has never seen before in local government. So I think the reality of that is something that we have to deal with every day. In terms of external contractor claims, I understand that largely relates to leisure often, and that's obviously an issue the service area might be able to provide more detail on. The airport dividend, I think that the 7.2 does relate, I think, to the airport dividend. I'll go away and check on that if that's all right. So maybe get a message popped over and get you an answer to that as quickly as I can. But obviously at risk, without wishing to discuss the commercial background of a company of which we have an ownership of, we all know the issues affecting the airport business. I think there's any certainty going into the future around dividends from the airport, although business is clearly improving as we speak. And there was arrangements in the loan agreement around future dividend payments. And I think that covers off all the questions I can answer.
Lovely, thank you. Councillor O'Shea, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Just to explain that our trade waste service does turn a profit every year. But we've had a very difficult year over the past 12 months, 18 months, with the number of our customers not operating at a normal pace and therefore paying a normal amount. So we have lost a contract. One issue with the service is that there is a natural size to it, and expanding it beyond the capacity that it has would require new vehicles and new crew members. So you have to have a certain amount of reliability of the contract beyond that. Not worthwhile doing it, it's not a risk to service. Fitness and mistaken report with regards to the ground maintenance vehicles as they are serviced in-house. As you where we bought the contract for that back in-house, I think 3 years ago now, and we have purchased new vehicles to go along with those. Well, the garage site is at Montague, just inside Clean Air Zone. Then we have funding agreement here. There's a new depot to replace Montague Street, which is at the corner Atlas works in Tynesley. That's outside Clean Air Zone, and a new garage facility to maintain our vehicles.
Did you want to come back on the vehicle?
It was two things. One was the vehicle, just to say, could we, because that's quite a big mistake there to be in the report. Can we just get a note from the officer sent around about what they did mean if they didn't mean that thing? And the other one was just on the Senar increase in budget on 3.7 on the addendum. It references that of the 7.3 million costs, 4.8 million is for agency staff, which will reduce in future years as permanent recruitment takes place, but it doesn't explain what the permanent cost is compared to the agency cost. So what's the difference between those two?
I will bring in the ECS in just a second. But on the send addendum overall, just to answer some of Councillor Hunt's questions as well, it's not at all uncommon when you get a report such as we got to find that hand in hand with performance goes under budgeting essentially for a service and under provision of resources to a service. That doesn't excuse poor performance, but very often it does go hand in hand with some of those issues. And certainly with our report, something we've uncovered very quickly off the back of that is just a base underfunding of that service, where you see some need for action injection, which is where you see some of the figures coming through here, and we've acted swiftly to correct some of what's going on there to try and secure the improvements that we need. I'll bring in Kevin, our DCS, just to give a little bit more detail on that than I am able to. Yeah, as long as everyone can hear you.
Morning, councillors. So I believe I'm writing that the difference between the staffing of the agencies is just under 2 million. None of the figures I've seen. This phase of the spend I would describe as the recovery phase. The request for the money is because there is a requirement for immediate action to stabilise the service. Alongside that, I'm doing a lot of work with colleagues about where the service is funded from, because there's an interrelationship with the high needs block, for example, on ESG. And some of the funding we needed to ask for today is because a proportion of service was being charged in HMB. I'm not certain it can be, so we've had to look for ways of switching money around. I would hope very much when we've completed this work that we bring back a little better news on the budget, because when we try and rebalance it. The challenge we've got is that many of the agency staff would leave in about 4 weeks, and we cannot afford to have that happen because they are supporting the children and families already in the system. That's why it's a recovery. All I can say is your interim director will do all the work behind the scenes to try to get back to a more regular position as soon as we can. And a lot of work is being done at the moment. So there is a review. I think that covers the main question.
That's very helpful, thank you. Right, I'm not seeing any more hands. I spent twice on that agenda item is budgeted for, just to give you a sense of pacing this 4-hour meeting. But they were important questions. So I'm good. Unless there's anything else anybody wants to come back on. Right, we've got recommendations 2.1 to 2.11 in front of us. Are those agreed? Lovely, thank you. Right, so I'll now take us back up the agenda to item 5, which is the medium-term financial plan update, which is back to Tristan.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, members will recognise the format for this, although I would just stress that this is earlier in the year than we have ever bought an MTFP update. Previously, we were hoping to do it 6-month rotation. This is obviously a quarterly rotation, and this is part of our ongoing efforts to make the budget setting process and budgetary monitoring as sophisticated as it can be within set an exemplar in local government in terms of the way we present financial information to members. And obviously there is significant large running budget deficit in future years, and we need to be aware of that. Part of the transparency of this is to have that discussion as early as we possibly can about how we close off that those future years deficits. But obviously, there's a great deal of uncertainty as we move into future years. I would just, if I can, for this purpose, stress how dependent closing those gaps are on the delivery plan and those delivery plan business cases that are rolling through into the cabinet process. Those delivery plans are about service improvement, but they're also about closing that budget gap off future years. So it's critical for the organisation that that they land and they are implemented and they deliver what we expect them to deliver. That's all I said. Brevity.
Thank you. Okay. Councillor Alden, Councillor Holt.
Thank you. Just try and keep it short. Couple of questions. So first of all, there's a pressure on the collection fund identified in here. Obviously, the report touches on that because the government wouldn't let failures be sent in. But other councils did other work as well, softer intervention approach, making sure that those that were struggling to pay got their business grants ASAP, wasn't any delays, so actually that many them back. So what did the council do in that space? Did the council do any of that work that places like Newcastle, Bath and Dagenham did, to go out and actually work with businesses to make sure that those losses didn't mount up in this way? On the pay award, it's got down, obviously, originally the council budget didn't allocate anything, now it's allocating, I believe, 1.5%. And it picks up that that's 7 million, I think, near the cost. Obviously, the leader's stated position is he thinks there should be a 10% increase. So I was curious as to why the leader isn't budgeting for that in the budget, if that's the increase he thinks there should be. And then finally, on the other issue around business rates, we originally had in the budget assumptions there was going to be a substantial amount of growth because of Analyse Local going out and doing work and identify re-ratings. Obviously, the majority of the growth is now removed on the new assumptions. How much of that reduction in growth is down to work Analyse Local didn't happen, I didn't do, or other reasons, and how much is down to actually the general growth didn't happen as was expected?
Councillor Hunt.
Thank you. Paragraph 2.2 refers to the delivery plans, which the cabinet member referred to, and which I seem to recall as being promised in the budget debate back in February. 2.2 refers to the delivery plans will come forward in July and September 2021 for cabinet approval. Now, I think we're a couple of days away from the end of July, so I'm happy to be corrected if there are delivery plans on the current agenda today, which I've missed. But otherwise, I think there was a question in terms of where are these delivery plans? And also, I think possibly the cabinet member in saying that it's early days, it may change, is being a little bit complacent, because if you look at the numbers now, in that budget debate in February, things for next year looked fairly neutral, looked as though it'd be okay. If you look at the numbers now, you've got three problems. One is the £38.5 million savings plan that was in that business plan in February, which was what these delivery plans were meant to deliver. Secondly, a £34 million gap for next year, which is now in the medium-term plan, which wasn't there. And thirdly, there's £5 million for children's services, which is £77 million in total. It's beginning to look as though council is going to be back in the days of Sir Albert Bore's jaws of doom next February when we come to the budget meeting. And as we're not seeing delivery plans emerging and they're consistently being put back, can we be given confidence that delivery plans that would not be part of a panic-stricken hacking away of services, as we saw 10 years ago, will be brought forward? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions. So I'll pick up a couple of business ones first. But I can assure you that the hacking will all be done. So on business grants, the team that normally brings in council tax every 9 had to money, which may sound like a similar thing, but it's a fundamentally different thing when it comes to processes and what's involved there. So the we didn't enforce underpayment of business rates most of last year. Lots of that was based on personal feedback from the business community. We knew that they were on their knees with the pandemic. We knew it was an intensely stressful time for them. And the strong feedback that we had was that we shouldn't be pushing things to people already incredibly stressed and struggling and trying to keep their businesses afloat. So we didn't. The rebasing, as you say, of some of those particular properties for business rates purposes was put on hold because of the pandemic, and we didn't go ahead with that. Now we're coming out the other side, we're in a slightly different place. And what we're able to do now is to start following up with those businesses that haven't paid but are able to. We need to understand where people haven't paid but aren't able to because they've gone under or because something else has happened. Those haven't recovered yet. But the key thing is that we just take a sensitive approach with this because I know businesses are still struggling. I know business owners are still stressed out of their minds. With reopening and some of the COVID measures they've still got in place, and whatever we do needs to not add to that burden while still making sure that we are treating people fairly. In terms of the exact numbers and proportions that go each way, I have to get you a further briefing on that, just to really dig down into that would be helpful. Otherwise, I'm going to bring in Councillor Chatfield to talk through the rest.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I'll pick up the pay award issue. I think Councillor Ward raised. Just on that, I think the request was quite clear in terms of what the leader requested. Was I believe that 10% would be the pay rise that our staff deserve. But that needs to be funded by central government because quite clearly local government across the board doesn't have the capacity now to fund such pay rises. And it was, as I understand it, in the past, in the dim and distant past, government would make allowance for additional pay rises for council staff through budget through grant allocation. So that's not an outlandish request. Very disappointing. Government turned that down, and we end up with 1.5 that we have to fund directly ourselves. In terms of the delivery plan. Councillor Hunt, I believe there are two papers on here that do relate to the delivery plan. One is the new ways of working, which is a big chunk, was an agreed part of the delivery plan and a very significant piece of work. And the other one, item 12, relating to actions taken to reduce temporary accommodation provision as well, came out of the delivery plan. It's not a complete picture on that agenda, but it is part of that agenda. So I would say there are two, and the rest will follow through and will be in place as we move through, as of the commitment into September. So again, look forward to a very busy cabinet agenda in September, I would suggest. And then that's it. But I think Councillor Hunt are absolutely not blasé about the challenge in front of us, and our finance team and officers across service areas are working incredibly hard to make sure we close down those issues in year, but also ensure we really land the delivery plan and it brings the expected benefits to the organisation. And I would just say again that the reason we brought this paper forward is so we can be absolutely transparent about the future challenges we face and the actions we are taking to address those challenges. And that is a step forward for this organisation and a sort of sign of financial maturity that we haven't had in the past.
Thank you. I'm just going to bring in our Chief Executive, Captain, to comment on the
yes, just to reassure members that CLT are meeting this afternoon to look at that very issue, which is the budget. So this is the end of Q1. We could wait, but I'm not prepared to do that. And certainly if Becky Howard was here, she would support that view. I think it's responsible that we try and look at solutions to closing the gap as soon as we possibly can. So there's a session this afternoon where we're all focused on looking at the challenges ahead and doing it in good time.
Thank you. Okay, I'm not seeing any more hands. We've got in front of us recommendations 2.1 to 2.3. Are those agreed? Thank you. Okay, so that's item 5. We've done item 6. Takes on to item 7, which is putting prevention first, consultation and commissioning plans. and procurement strategy for vulnerable adults, support for disabilities and mental health services. I think you win the prize for the longest title today. Over to Councillor Hamilton.
Absolutely, Deputy Leader. I am really pleased to be presenting this report today. This follows on from a report agreed at Cabinet on the 16th of April last year for the recommissioning of vulnerable adult housing and wellbeing support services. That was part of commissioning, which included wellbeing support services from the homelessness, domestic abuse, young people, and people living in institutional settings. These contracts went live on the 1st of December 2019. The report before you today sets out the second phase of this recommissioning that covers disability and mental health client groups. Current contracts relating to the service being recommissioned expires on the 30th of June 2020. It is intended that recommissioning will run for a further 5 years with an option to extend for a further 2 years subject to performance and available budgets. And the relevant break clauses will actually be inserted into the contract to reflect this. And the current annual budget for the prevention services is £7.474 million over the 5-year procurement period, which will be a total of £37.370 million. I'd like Cabinet to agree this proposal, please, and I ask if there are any questions, and I hand back to the Deputy Leader. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton. Do we have any questions? Seeing any hands? Okay. Well, in that case, we've got recommendation 2126 in front of us. Are those agreed?
Very good.
Thank you. Right, back to Councillor Hamilton for approval to extend contract for the provision of sexual health treatment and prevention services. Item 8.
Right, thank you, Deputy Leader. This report is seeking Cabinet's approval for a 7.5-month extension to the current contract for the provision of sexual health treatment and the prevention services, which is delivered by UHB, University Hospitals, Birmingham, due to unavoidable delays to the re-procurement timescale that have been experienced due to COVID-19. This 7.5 months extension will allow for the re-procurement process to take place fairly and equitably, allowing all constituent tasks, including the sexual needs assessment, to be completed to the extended timescale. And this will enable the new sexual health service to be mobilised on the 1st of April 2023. The recommendation before Cabinet today is to approve the extension of the contract for the provision of sexual health treatment and the prevention services delivered by UHB that will cover from the period of the 10th of August 2022 to the 31st of March 2023, and to be funded by Public Health. And can I say thank you, and thank you, Deputy Leader. Are there any questions? And back over to you.
Are there any questions, Councillor Mackey?
Thanks very much. I'll keep it brief, but I think whilst we acknowledge this is a contract extension running out of time for re-procurement, if any service can claim to be fully scratched by the sort of coronavirus pandemic, it is this service. And so we totally understand that, and sort of really just to say congratulations to Justin and his team for all the hard work that they've done during this pandemic. I think there's been no sort of nothing that we've ever come across before. I think they've done a fantastic job. So I just thought I'd take this as an opportunity to thank Justin and his team for
It's lovely to hear, and it's a service also dear to my heart because my father is a sexual health nurse. Well, it should be noted, not in Birmingham, long, long way away, and nothing to do with this contract.
Judging by that handcuffs.
Definitely embarrassing story enough.
Now we know why we have poor internet connection in this one.
Lovely, right, back to you, Councillor Hamilton, I think.
Right, this was item 23 that I'm moving forward to the next item, and it's about child and family weight management services.
Oh, sorry, we just need to finish this item first.
Oh, sorry, we've just got
I asked everyone to keep the time, and it's me throwing us off now.
If we're finishing up, can I thank you for your thanks? It was really appreciated. The staff have done a phenomenal job over the last 16, 17 months, and we really appreciate your vote of thanks. Back to the deputy.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton. Right, we've only got one recommendation. 2.1, is that agreed? Lovely. That's agenda item 8 done. Right, I've had a request from one of our officers who has to leave early to go to agenda item 23 now. Agenda item 23 is Child and Family Weight Management Services Grant. So that just means we'll take all public health funds together. Any objections to that? Anyone okay with us doing that? Okay, Councillor Hamilton again.
Right, can I say that I'm really pleased, I'm always pleased to presenting contracts where it means we're going to have extra money in the service. But it is a late report, so I have to apologise for that, but we are absolutely have no choice. And I'd like to thank Public Health for actually the quick turnaround for this report following the success of Birmingham's success in the joint application for the additional funds from PHE England of £861,000 994 pence from July 2021 to June 2022. This report seeks approval for a single contract negotiation with Breeze bodies to provide child and family behavioural intervention for children identified above a healthy weight in the National Child Measurement Programme. In Birmingham, I just thought we'd add this. Last year, overweight and obesity prevalence for our children in reception is 22.7%, and for year 6, it actually goes up to 29.7%, and the levels of excess weight amongst Black, African and Black Caribbean children are higher than the national average, and adult weight measurement grant funding was awarded to local authorities directly because of what was found for funding to be assigned to children and families' weight management services. A competitive funding round was instigated on the 15th of March, which was not long ago, and this was a joint funding application between Public Health and Breeze bodies and developed at pace, and Breeze bodies were chosen as a partner because of their extensive experience in delivering this type of program and their unique use of behavioural insights and evidence. I would like Cabinet to agree this. Can I thank the Deputy Leader, and if there are any questions, please let me know now or forever hold your peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton. Are you going to let us know, or no holding of peace today? Councillor Gordon.
It's a quick one. Looking at the data the council has to see online, and apologies if you have recent data you might well as cabinet member, around the makeup of groups that were above average weight issues, to be honest, one of no work compared to national average. There are other groups in the city as well have issues. If this is successful, is the plan to then try and reach those groups as well?
Well, knowing Justin the way I do, you have hit it in one, it will be. But let me, because we've not had the discussion, let me hand over to the director so that he can tell you what he's going to be asking me to do in months to come. Justin, over to you.
Thanks, Councillor. And thank you also for the thanks under the previous item. This funding was created by government because the evidence base for intervention for families and children on weight management is very, very poor. There are no good evidence-based interventions currently that demonstrate weight loss that's sustained. There is no evidence base around interventions that work better with communities from different ethnicities, more deprived communities where we see higher rates of obesity as well. or with children with learning difficulties or additional needs. So through this pilot, we put those in as additional groups we want to focus on. And the whole emphasis of this one-year programme is to develop the evidence base and work out what's worked. Our understanding is that government are looking at this to then potentially find further money in future years with public health grant to specifically ring-fence funding for child weight management. We wouldn't be able to absorb this burden into the public health grant without having significant implications next year. We don't have enough reserve to be able to do that. But we are actively discussing with them at every point. There's no point funding us unless we've talked about an exit strategy. And we have designed this to be a very discrete programme that fits within the academic year with a partner who can hit the ground running in September, which is one of the key criteria as we consider developing the plan.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, any further questions? No, anything else you want to come back on? That's answered.
No, I think this is, I was just going to say no, but this is a really important issue because obesity leads to lifetime issues if not addressed. And I do think I applaud public health for taking the initiative to go out for this funding, and the fact that if we can make a difference to our children, we can enable them to become more healthy adults. So I absolutely support what we're trying to do as a city. Thank you.
And it's fantastic work.
Yeah.
Thank you. Right, we have one recommendation. Recommendation 2.1 is agreed. Lovely, thank you. And that takes us on. It's the Paulette Show.
Oh, sorry.
We've got item 9, which is Neighbourhood Network Schemes Recommissioning. I think I would fall to Councillor Hampson again.
Right. Thank you, Deputy Lord Mayor. And can I say that
I'll take it.
That's why I didn't know next to
Thank you, Deputy Leader. I apologise, and thank you, Cabinet. I know I've had quite a lot of reports, but again, this is another really important report coming to Cabinet. Our current 10 neighbourhood network services was agreed by Cabinet in November 2017. The NNSs have supported our older citizens with a range of community-based alternatives to support citizens within their own neighbourhoods, working closely with our voluntary and community sector. Our NNSs are part of our vision and strategy as a service to modernise adult social care, which focuses on a preventative approach to manage the increasing demands to social care, linked in with our successful 3 conversations framework, which has focused on connecting citizens to their local assets, resources to enable citizens to live independently within their homes and community. This report to Cabinet sets out the commissioning plans for the procurement strategy for recommissioning of neighbourhood networks, and the current contract will expire on the 31st of March 2022, and the new contract will commence on the 1st of April 2022. We have the option to extend for a further 2 years, subject to satisfactory performance and budget availability. Can I also say within this contract, we are widening it so it will include the 18 to 49-year-olds, which will make it life course, and the annual value of this contract will be £1 million, depending on adult social care transformation plan budget approval. I am actually really pleased to present this recommissioning of our NNS to Cabinet, and I ask for approval. I hand back to the Deputy Leader, and if there are any questions, please let me know. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? I'm not. Oh, Yeah.
No questions, but I think it's been a really well thought out, well supported initiative that's been fantastic and helpful during COVID to so well done.
Lovely. I'm not seeing any hands. Unless there's anything you'd like to add. So,
Again, another excellent piece of work from Adult Social Care. Can I also say openly, I'd like to pay thanks to Sharon Thompson and the Neighbourhood Service that have also been very much involved in this. This has not been done in isolation. This has been done with the health service and with other parts of the council. So I'd like to say at this point that this piece of work, onward and upward. Thank you.
lovely.
Call it telling you investing.
Sorry,
Call it telling you investing.
hey.
Keep up the good work is the message I'm hearing there.
Thank you.
We've got in front of us recommendations 2.1 to 2.5. Are those agreed? Thank you. Okay, agenda item 10. You can have a break now. We've got Birmingham City Council support for West Midlands Refugee Transitions Outcomes Fund. Is that over to Councillor Cotter?
It is indeed. Thank you, Councillor Leader. This is particularly to advise Cabinet of our participation in a bid to secure funding from the Home Office Refugee Transitions Outcome Fund. This is a national pilot scheme that's aimed at investing in positive employment, housing and integration outcomes for new refugees. So that's people who've exited the asylum system with a grant of refugee status or humanitarian protection. This is an area that's not seen any sustained national investment for the last decade, so we're quite keen to secure some of this resource for the region. I'm also pleased to let you know that as of yesterday, we notified that this bid has received provisional approval. So, all being well, the aspirations that are set out in this report are now likely to become a reality, which I think is very welcome news indeed. We're working with other local authorities in the region on this, so it's ourselves, Coventry, Wolverhampton and Sandwell. And what we're doing is supporting an application that was submitted by Big Issue Invest. The way the fund works is that projects must be delivered via a social impact bond approach. So the social investor, in this case Big Issue Invest, puts up the investment up front through their own special purpose vehicle, and then the Home Office pays by outcomes as and when they're achieved. You can see the outcomes as stipulated by the Home Office in 3.8 of the report. They cover things like employability, entry into sustained employment or self-employment, and obtaining safe and secure accommodation, and also some issues around wider social integration as well. Big Issue Invest are responsible for delivery and they hold the associated risk. Our role in this is twofold. Firstly, performance management. So we monitor delivery of the work within the city and we will receive funding for that to support a grading officer who will undertake that monitoring work. Secondly, we provide strategic inputs into governance. The Home Office are keen that local authorities are closely involved in the projects in their area, and so we'll have a seat on any of the governance bodies that are set up to oversee the project. So it will provide, I think, some really much needed extra resource to support new citizens who are building new lives here in Birmingham, and it will be delivered through a series of partners who are acknowledged experts in the fields of migration and resettlements. So I think that news that we had yesterday around the provisional approval is really welcome, and I hope that Cabinet can support the bids and the detail of this report.
Thank you. Any comments or queries? I'm not seeing anyone. Okay. Unless there's anything else you'd like to add?
No, nothing in that.
Lovely. Okay.
Have time on the agenda.
We've got in front of us recommendations 2.1 to 2.4. Are those agreed?
Agreed.
Yeah. Okay, back to Councillor Cotton. We've got item 11, which is the Afghan interpreters relocation scheme.
Thank you. So this updates Cabinet on the steps we've taken in response to the call to assist in the relocation of interpreters who've been supporting British forces in Afghanistan. And I'm sure that we'll all agree that we've got a moral obligation to play our part in helping, given the enormous risks that these people have taken and the very real danger that many would face if we did not offer them a place of safety as our forces withdraw by September. The report is partly retrospective, as we had to respond with great speed to the call of help that was issued by the government. We consulted with our partners. Again, we've got some real experts in the field operating in this city, and rapidly concluded we could offer places to 80 people. That was based on an assessment of what was feasible in terms of the available support and the speed at which our partners could mobilise that support, the overall availability of private rented sector accommodation in the city, and also an acknowledgement that we've also got some additional existing commitments to support refugees and asylum seekers in the city, including many of those who are dispersed here under the Home Office national arrangements. So the speed at which the scheme was rolled out also left us limited time to negotiate contracts to deliver support. So that's why we worked with Refugee Action, who many of you will know, a long-standing, very well-respected organisation, who already worked to provide orientation, accommodation support services with us. We did this initially for the contract variation, and we're now seeking Cabinet's approval to enter into single contractor negotiations to take this work forward and ensure that we can speedily deploy that support as people arrive in Birmingham over the coming weeks. I'd like also to note we'll receive over £1 million worth of funding to support the individuals arriving under this scheme. The precise amount, of course, will depend on the composition of the families that arrive in the city. That funding will enable us to deliver accommodation and support around health and wider integration. I do think that by taking the steps outlined in this report, we're again honouring our commitment as a city of sanctuary, but also the nation's debt of gratitude to those who assisted our forces in Afghanistan. So I very much commend this report to Cabinet.
Thank you. Right, everyone wants to comment on this one. But Councillor Mackey, Councillor Alden, Councillor Hunt.
Just to say, we can completely concur, I should say, these are people who put their lives at risk to help our troops. We acknowledge it's another single contract negotiation, but there is an element of retrospective sort of decisions made and then coming to Cabinet. But that just, as John says, there's a genuine urgent need to act here, and the Home Office has asked for the Council to support, and we have done, so we're fully supportive of that because, you know, these people put their lives at risk to help our troops, and we are due to help them.
Okay. Councillor Alden.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. We help our troops definitely deserve our help now, so I'm very happy to support that. It was just a minor question, I think. Obviously, we've got the chart in here that explains the funding support that depending on their personal circumstances, as you mentioned, each person qualifies for. Apologies if I've missed it here, but is there any support being given to them try and help them during the 12-month period they qualify for support into work, so that they're not in need of support post the 12 months and they're able to carry on their lives?
Okay, and Councillor Hunt.
Thank you. Yes, this is very, very welcome, of course. And the Cabinet member is quite right in saying that there's a moral obligation. Just a couple of questions. I wondered if there had been any involvement with the British Legion on this, because one of the features of the City of Sanctuary programme, I seem to recall, was a wide involvement of the voluntary sector. And in fact, the benefits, I'm not sure how well this worked out, but I understood there were significant benefits when people settled, and they were really welcomed broadly by our community. People coming in and helping them to settle. So the British Legion seems to me to be an organisation that would be very interested in providing support here, and I just wondered if there had been any involvement of them. Secondly, perhaps I could just ask a broad question about the security and safety of people who are coming. And I think a broad question there. I might just want to talk to the Cabinet member separately outside Cabinet about some of these issues.
Okay, Councillor, are there any other comments or queries? Councillor Cotton, do you want to come back?
Yeah, certainly. And thanks to for their support for this. I think it does speak our commitment as a city of sanctuary, as well as the moral obligation I talked about that we have as a nation to this cohort of people. In terms of assistance into employment, Council, that is included as part of that package of support. I'm very happy to provide you some further details of what's in that package outside of this meeting. I'm not aware of any initial conversations that we've had with the Royal British Legion specifically on this, Councillor Hunt, although I may be wrong on that. There's been conversations at officer level. Obviously, we do work very closely with them through some of the other work we do around the armed forces. I'm sure that we can pick up those conversations as part of that. On the security and safety issues, obviously the Home Office, I think, particularly cognizant of many of those. Perhaps we should have that conversation offline if there are specific concerns that you want to raise with me, we can take those up.
Okay, good. Any other queries or comments? No. Lovely. Okay, we've got in front of us then recommendations 2.1 to 2.4. Are those agreed?
Agreed.
Okay. Okay, right, over to Councillor Thompson now. We've got item 12, acceleration of city housing transformation to enable reduction in temporary accommodation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Leader. So this report really is looking at trying to reduce bed and breakfast usage across the city for those that are suffering from homelessness as families, and also temporary accommodation. And I think everybody will agree it's much needed in the city. And whilst National Leader are looking at homelessness, it's pretty much aimed towards the sleeping side, and there's not much debate nationally around the low in terms of family housing and family temporary accommodation. So we really looked at investing money into this, and I just want to, and the first off, thank our director, Julie Griffin, and her team, and also those in inclusive growth who work exceptionally hard on this to make sure that this comes forward. And thank you to Councillor Chatfield and his team for keeping us to the wire when it comes to the finances on this and what that actually looks like. This will make a huge impact on the people that are finding themselves homeless that we've got within the city. And this will help to reduce the demand, so what we're seeing coming through the door. It fits in line with what we're doing around prevention. It will expand the use for alternative types of temporary accommodations that we're using in the private rented sector, and more move on and more longer term options, and that's what we desperately need to be seeking for our citizens in Birmingham who are facing homelessness at this moment in time. So I would hope that everybody would agree that this is a good thing to take forward and agree with the proposals within the actual report.
Okay. Any questions or comments? Right, I've got Councillor Alden, Councillor Hunt, Councillor Hackney.
Thank you very much. Number of questions. So start off on the options considered under 4.3. So 4.4 is the third option. And it seems, if I've read it right, and please do correct me if I've not read it right, that 4.4, the third option, is to do 4.3 plus something extra. That's the way it's going to be reads anyway. And so when you look at 4.3 and what that includes as one of the list of things you want to do is do targeted street purchases. But it doesn't seem to say anywhere in here about what you mean by that. What process will be used for targeting? Who will make that decision? What consultation there'll be with ward members? Because clearly, if we're targeting streets around the city, different streets are going to be in different members' wards, and they would need to be consulted on that. And also, there isn't any assurance in here that using InReach to do that won't be a way of bypassing consultation that would normally happen if the council was doing something directly. So it'd be useful to get some answers around that. Picking up then the InReach issue, I noticed in the appendix it talks about there's an underutilisation of PRS and private rented schemes, although it doesn't then list that in the preferred option as a way of solving the issue. But it does talk about InReach, and presumably that's the shoehorn that's put out there to be able to lead InReach into this project as to justification, because obviously InReach is the council's PRS scheme. Now they charge currently a commercial rent rather than a social rent. So is the proposal then that this would be done through commercial rents rather than a social rent, or is the proposal to change InReach's rental policy as part of this work? Then picking up 7.3, and it's also then in the recommendation, I think, at 2.2. The report states the council wants to convert a council property into a hostel, but it doesn't state where that is. From a later report on the agenda, I think I do know, but perhaps a clarity given the decision isn't here. It wants to just be confirmed where that property is. Thank you.
Okay. Do you want to come back on those, or should I take them all?
No, let me just get through my
That's fine.
So
There's quite a lot there.
So first of all, I just want to start with the member consultation towards And when it comes to this particular programme, I will make sure, and I will take personal responsibility for making sure that members are consulted on, and if that means me having those meetings in those meetings, I will do that, because I think it's important that the consultation does take place. In terms of in terms of the property that we're talking about that's been mentioned without a name, don't particularly want to put the name in there at the moment, because you have to think that sometimes this is about vulnerable families and we don't always want to identify where we are placing people. But I can assure you that whatever that property is, the ward members will know and they will be consulted and we will be having dialogue with them. In terms of the commercial rent, and in which I think I'm going to bring Julie in just to cover that piece up, because she's got more detail in the questions that you've asked in terms of detail.
Okay, to Julie.
Thank you very much, Julie. Thank you, Councillor Thompson. With regards to InReach, we're going to be doing some additional work, which will take a few weeks to actually look at the actual model of InReach. We're proposing that these will be social rent. Therefore, we need to look at the rent policy and how we change that to ensure that these are social rental accommodation units. But yes, we're going to be doing further work over the coming weeks about the InReach model.
I was going to say there was the issue about what was meant by targeted streets and what the criteria are.
Okay, sorry, would you like me to get that, Councillor Thompson? Yeah, so we've got a number of households that are in temporary accommodation and bed and breakfast at the moment that we have specific needs, larger families, people require an adaptation. So targeting means that we're going to be looking at accommodation that will meet specific needs for people that are in temporary accommodation, and we haven't been able to secure suitable accommodation for our own stock. So that's where we will be looking to move households into suitable, sustainable accommodation that meets their needs. So we're going to be focusing on 3-bed plus properties, which is in the strategic business case. We've got a number of families that require, around 15 families require over 5 beds plus. So we're going to be really looking at those larger families with specific needs and also large accommodation. But as you can see, within the strategic business case, there is quite a significant need for additional properties with regards to 3 plus families. So we need to be able to 3 bed plus. We need to be able to have that flexibility to ensure that we can move people into accommodation that's more suitable. With regards to targeted, which is what I've just mentioned, but the street purchase, we will be looking at potentially identifying those properties that may be actually up for sale or at auction. We'll be looking at different avenues of how we acquire those properties so that we can actually ensure that we support those vulnerable and temporary accommodation. Thank you.
Right, I've got Councillor Hunt and then Councillor Mackey.
Thank you. I'm still waiting. I think the Cabinet member has been unnecessarily coy about the location of the £2 million hostel that's proposed, and I thank her for her engagement with myself and my ward colleague last week. As Councillor Orban said, it is quite clearly indicated in the report later on this agenda that it's at the site in Perry Basket Gardens, which is former university accommodation and is if anything, is located within the new residential scheme that's in Perry Bar. To my mind, on this side, we have for some time been advocating the council putting the capital in and getting itself properties on which it can use as halfway houses for people who are homeless. So, in principle, very much support this. As I thank the Cabinet member for her engagement, and ward terms will look at some of the details around it. Now, what I would say about that, though, is it's a bit disappointing that it's only available for 5 years. Again, that's an issue for the later report about Perry Bar. If the council's doing it, I suspect that there's no limit on only for 5 years. And I would hope that maybe when we look at the later report in Perry Bar and what it says there, where again it mirrors what it says here, the site will only be available for 5 years. I would hope the Cabinet might actually stick a door in and say, well, actually, we want to maintain this kind of accommodation as long as we need it. Maybe 5 years would be nothing we'd want if it wasn't needed after 5 years, but I don't think that's guaranteed at all. Similarly, in terms of the street units, I heard what was said, it was about £260,000 a unit, maybe a 4 or 5 bedroom property. I suspect the timing is to get on with it. Otherwise, putting some of that money into the very vast scheme would seem to be sensible. Again, when you look at that report, I think we need to look at issues around the affordable and social housing rates in that project. So if this capital is continuing over a number of years, maybe we need to start to look at how that's deployed in that project. So, sorry to blow the gap. It's pretty obvious what's been talked about from the papers here, and I can't really oppose it in principle as a ward councillor because we've supported this kind of project on this side. I think it's really important.
And on that, it's down to me on preference to like people saying homelessness. I think that's being clear on that. And again, I want to thank you for the kind of engagement on that and your other visits that you said that you do in terms of around that. When it comes to it being more than 5 years, I think it's really important that as a council that we don't just aim towards creating temporary accommodation, but we actually aim towards long-term sustainable solutions. And we would like to think in 5 years' time that we didn't have the need to continue to have that facility. But what we do want to do is give ourselves an option to review it so far down the track. So if we do find that we need to continue that particular property, then obviously we can bring that argument forward. But I think to put it in there for a 10-year, 15-year or long term, it's a little bit more difficult to go back and sort of address after that. So I think that's the reason why we went for that shorter period of time.
A lot of those questions were, I think, mainly for the very bar paper, which we will come on to later. Yeah, we will come on to later as well. Lovely. Councillor Mackey.
Yeah, thanks very much. And to be pleased to know that Councillor Walden picked up a lot of what I was going to say. But it's a more comment, really. Whilst obviously we support, being brought away from temporary accommodation, etc., because people need to feel at home and where somewhere they can identify with. I just wear caution of how the council sort of goes about it. I would worry about sort of state bodies that have attempted to intervene and got massive backing of public money, and they themselves sometimes can sort of adjust the market, can sort of inflate it, as it were, and actually can stop other players from getting involved in that market. And so there's big issues with types of accommodation, and there's sort of Council Rice has got it as going in into sort of to try and improve that market. So I was slightly concerned about when councils, as I say, get involved. I think a lot of them behind them can buy a lot of property, and that's a tendency to skew the market. And so what I'm just asking is that we're supportive of this, just be careful of the impact, because you don't want to have a negative effect on what you're trying to achieve.
So just thank you for that. And just on that, it's just to be clear that we really have tested the market and what needs to happen. And the urgency around temporary accommodation is to reduce the use of bed and breakfast, which is the most difficult entry for some people. Cooking facilities, flexibility, in hotels, and sometimes not even in the city. This is for us to make sure we're maintaining a provision in the city, that we can have wraparound support, that our officers can be there, and we've got proven schemes where that has worked particularly well. In terms of skewing the market, I think that's an important point, but there's nothing that skewed the housing market more than exempt accommodation, in terms of taking some of the family houses and turning them into those kinds of exempt properties. And what we need in the city, the urgent need, is family housing. We cannot continue in a situation where you have large families who are, in essence, stuck in temporary accommodation because we cannot find the right size new one. So this is to kind of mitigate that. So in terms of imbalance of the market, I don't think this will happen. If anything, I would prefer us to be able to purchase properties from them being flipped at the moment into a market that is oversaturated and outstrips the need of its actual permanent need.
Exactly. if the market was working, I don't think we'd have this report in the first place. Councillor Alden, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. And actually, it ties in neatly to those comments that the cabinet members just touched on. So it was just to say that following the information we had in terms of how parking to work, really would just urge that we focus on those places where those properties being sold by we know that existing bad landlords, and focusing on those properties which are particularly run down, so that there is some benefit then to the wider setting as well of actually getting rid of a problem which you just mentioned. Active accommodation is a really great example where that does cause so many issues. So that the money can really be maximised rather than just driving up a bidding war with competing local families who are trying to stay with there.
So just coming back on that, Bobby, obviously what and things like that, we understand some streets get oversaturated and things like that. We don't want to be in that position. And so I think, we are looking at it in its whole entirety, but we're not just looking at it from a business model point of view. We've got to also look at it from the residents' point of view and where they want to live, and actually the areas they want to live in and what's best for those families. So we will take it all into consideration, but this is a people-centred approach, as well as financial nutrition.
Exclamation mark.
Lovely. Have we exhausted all the comments and queries? Not seeing any more hands. Fantastic. Unless there's anything else you want to add, I'll take us. Lovely. I'll take us to recommendations then. So we've got recommendations 2.1 to 2.6 in front of us. Are those agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay, back to Councillor Thompson. We've got rough sleeper accommodation programme, round 1, 2021-2022, funding bid, approval and award.
Brilliant. So this is today's cabinet is really important in terms of homelessness across the city, and it's coming on a day where PERS is interim report is being shared publicly, something that Birmingham has been able to do. So we've got to look more closer to home and think about what's happening in the kingdom now. And this really is one of those programmes that we assist in that. It's about working in partnership with other organisations and not just the council doing things. So citizen housing is really key to that. And it is almost a sort of, it's not a continuation of, the government haven't continued housing first at this point and have not made that commitment, but actually providing these properties will help us with those people who will not be eligible to go into housing first as new applicants. So this is really hugely important, and I think it will diversify the needs and also give that moving on, particularly what we keep talking about. We don't want people stuck in temporary positions. 15 units for citizen housing, Birmingham City Council 25, and also looking at the 40 units as well. So I think this is a really good programme and really urge the committee.
So, in that case, we've got recommendations 2.1 to 2.5. Is that agreed? Lovely. Okay. Right. The next report is the leader's report, but he is on leave, so I'll be presenting it today. Right one in front of me. So next up, item 14 is the major sporting event strategy, 2022 to 2030. This is seeking approval and endorsement for a major new sporting event strategy for the city. Obviously, we have a very major sporting event coming to us in 1 year and 1 day with the Commonwealth Games. The countdown is well and truly on now. This is a strategic approach to building off the back of that and attracting more sporting events to the city over the next 10 years up to 2032. We've already got the World Trampolining and Tumbling Championships coming, which is fantastic international marketing. It's great for promoting the city. And excitingly for inclusive sport, we've got the World Blind Games coming as well to the city, both of which will bring in thousands of thousands of additional people to Birmingham, but also millions to the economy. It should be noted that this isn't just about fun sporting strategy, fun those sports are. In 2019, Birmingham's major events programme delivered more than £75 million economic benefit to the city. It's a great place to keep Birmingham on the international map, but it's also a huge economic boost to our city, particularly for the hospitality and event sectors, which have been struggling over the last couple of years. Any subsequent funding decisions have to come from subsequent bids because of this. This approach will of course go through the government's channels. So this isn't a sign off for all of the bid, for any bids, they will have to come through channels should finance or other approvals be needed. But this sets out how we're going to approach those. Are there any questions? Everyone's interested in this one. Right, Councillor Wolfen, Councillor Hunt, Councillor Mackey.
Thank you. Just a couple of things. On page 22, I think it is of the strategy, it splits up the 10-year lifetime of this into three time frames. So the three time frames are immediate, medium, and long term. The immediate is this year, which we're halfway through. The medium term next year, and then everything else is in the last section, long term. So everything year 2 to year 10, effectively, initial strategy is chucked into one time frame. Some slightly bizarre in terms of the logic. I don't think there is any logic as to why we've done so much chance in one category rather than sort of splitting it out. But more clearly about the time period. And then the other one to pick up is I'm assuming it's an oversight rather than a policy change from the council. But I don't think it mentioned in the list of events the council, in the covering report, is interested in anything about international cricket. Obviously, we do have one of the leading venues in international cricket in the country, and that always does really well. So I'm hoping that is merely a list on the covering report isn't exhaustive rather than a change of policy on that. And then finally, around the issue of fan parks, because for the last few years now, predating COVID, putting aside to what happened during COVID, the council hasn't had fan parks, policy position, certainly hasn't had them anyway. And I just asked that as we're in the early stages of this time, we actually have a conversation with hospitality industry in the city about whether actually they would be keen to see fan parks return as a way of supporting them, because certainly responses elsewhere in the country, the ones that happened during COVID seems to be it was very good for supporting business. And frankly, it often actually forms a part of criteria of having international events anyway, or is a bonus in your scoring of showing that you put on fan parks. So I do think we should be looking at that rather than just continuing sort of the blanket position of not having them. And there's a great opportunity. You don't need to bring in someone nationally to run it with some chain. We can open it up so actually the concession stands are local businesses, so we're supporting independent Birmingham businesses, for instance.
Thank you. Councillor Hunt.
Thank you. And this is all very promising, and it could be fantastic for the city. But I just wonder what risk assessment has been taking place on this, given Tokyo is going ahead without any spectators. And although the UK is ahead of the rest of the world significantly in its vaccination programme, any international events could well be significantly affected, not just next year, but beyond. So I just wonder what risk assessments are taking place in terms of any international events that might be scheduled.
Thank you. And Councillor Mackey.
Just a shout out for some of the sort of less high profile sports. I was pleased to see you mentioned the tumbling championships is coming. Windley Leisure Centre used to be in my ward. I know that plenty of residents go there and take part in things that are put on, one of which is trampolining. And you have a lot of people who start trampolining in early days because just like bouncing around basically. But then basically, then very quickly the trainers there can get them onto a programme that actually has a direct progression. If you're good enough, you can go to the Olympics or to anything there. And you don't need to have sort of £120 footballers to do that. You know, to me, you can just turn up and bounce around on trampoline, and it can get you to somewhere where you could have international recognition. And so I just think the support of that could be delivered through. It'd be nice to think that we could have a few couple of Birmingham residents arriving in the 2023 championships from there. So I think very serious sports that don't always get the high profile attention that the likes of football and sports have.
Hello, thank you. So to take them backwards, I think we'll struggle to find a garden belonging to a child without a trampoline in it these days. It's great that we have something that people could aspire to coming to the city, I agree. Councillor Alton, the question about the backloading of the time frame. My understanding is that that's largely because we want to spend the first sort of period ducks in a row. We've got our offer right, we've got our venues ready, and we know we've got our machine ready essentially to start bidding. And then the latter years are about doing those bids, bringing in the things and doing the hard work. So that reflects a setup period, the strategy, and then a longer doing period is where we've got that sort of back weighted. I'm a T20 convert when it comes to cricket. Yeah, I blame Councillor Zappa entirely. The Holly Sound a couple of years ago, it was an interesting experience. I tried to.
Haze of beer.
I tried.
It's the only place to watch cricket in Holly.
Beer.
So I'm told. So it may not be explicitly referenced, but Edgbaston is a key venue in our city. Cricket is a key sport for our city, with a huge fan base, and absolutely, we're on cricket to be part of that offer and that calendar. Fan parks, really good question. So I understand some bids have done individual sort of mini things in their areas where they've worked. We've got the city centre strategic group with the bids, where no doubt this question will come up. We'll be doing those as and where businesses feel that they would be helpful. It's worth noting, of course, the last couple of years, some of our major spaces where we would have done this kind of thing have been dug up, like Centenary Square, for example. So we kind of lacked some city centre space to do it. But with the Commonwealth Games coming, we will be, of course, having fan parks as part of that offer. That's a great way to sort of get a template for how that might work. And then Councillor Hunt on Tokyo. It's fantastic to see the performance of Team GB so far. Obviously a crying shame that there's nobody there to cheer them on. We are monitoring, of course, the vaccine rollout when it comes to Commonwealth Games. At the moment, things are looking positive, which is really good. But of course, we will continue monitoring that, and that will apply for any future events as well. And when it comes to a risk assessment, largely that will be on an event-by-event basis, a bid-by-bid basis that we're doing it. So this is about setting up the approach for bidding for major events and what our offer will be. And then event by event, we'll need to risk assess what that might entail and what extra protections we need to put around that. I think I picked up all of your questions, but tell me if I'm wrong. Okay, lovely. I'm not seeing any more hands. So, right. I've got a billion bits of paperwork in front of me. Let's find my way back to the agenda. Okay, only one recommendation here, which is 2.1. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay, the agenda says there'll be a break now, but we are running ahead of time. So if people are okay with it, I was going to take us through till 12 o'clock before having a break.
Might get finished by then.
You never know. Everyone's so well ahead. Lovely. So are we still on? Are we still live? Fantastic. Okay, so we'll postpone the break until 12, if that's all right. And I'll take us on to agenda item 15, which is publicising blighting and environmental crime cases proposed policy. Councillor O'Shea.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and be brief. The item relates to a proposed policy for publicising images obtained through council operated CCTV, purposes of identifying those related to a committee blighting offences, on the general details of those who have been convicted of those offences, publicising afterwards. We can now consult on this proposed policy and such that there be no material issues being raised in private consultation to implement it as a result of this recommendation. I would recommend the cabinet approve 2.1 and 2.2.
Thank you. Any questions? I thought there might be. Right, let's go Councillor Hunt first, this time in Councillor Alton.
Thank you. I'm not sure if the words name and shame come up in this report or not. But this clearly is a report about naming and shaming, and it appears to be suggesting there's not going to be a great deal of naming and shaming under this policy, which is not very much of a surprise, because you're dealing with criminal actions here and you have to be very careful how you deal with them. What I do think is there's a significant switch in policy proposed here, which is welcome, which is a switch to moving towards what's described as overt cameras rather than covert cameras, and that's cameras which are publicised at their presence. And the reason it's welcome is because it enables more cameras to be placed, whereas the covert policy that's been in place up to now has been so hemmed around with legal restrictions, it's been almost impossible to get cameras where they're needed on fly tipping sites. I don't know how many fly tipping sites have ever been done with them, but the business of dealing with those regular sites that we all know in our communities which are not tackled, there's regular fly tipping. You ask the officers to do something about it. I had an officer say, yes, we'll look at cameras, and then they came back and said, well, we haven't got any evidence of fly tipping on this site. They've been fly tipping there regularly, weekly, monthly, for years. So hopefully with this switch, it will become much easier to get the cameras in. They will understand some investment in cameras, and that's very welcome. I just remain very sceptical about the naming and shaming policy. A little bit of publicity around miscreants who can't be found, same as the police do, that's fine and that's good. It needs to happen. But the idea there's going to be naming and shaming seems to be not something that's going to happen under the framework that's proposed here. And maybe it's not the right approach anyway. Let's just get the fly tipping stopped. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Alden.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so absolutely support in principle the idea of what the recommendations are for here, which is around publicising the details of incidents and suspected offenders. And this is something members of our group have been asking for, raising various meetings for a number of years now, so it's good to see it being picked up. Obviously, the devil, as always, will be in how it's actually operated. The policy is no good having policy if it ends up not being used or gets tied up in knots, as Councillor Hunt just referenced around the covert CCTV issues in the past. But no support.
No. Councillor O'Shea, back to you.
Thank you. Well, I welcome the support from opposition members. I would, of course, note that deploying covert cameras has been made more difficult in recent years as a result of government policy and government change to the law, which has made it much more challenging to deploy covert cameras. We are using covert cameras because they are easy to install. Is also providing visible deterrent to those who want to fly tip. I would certainly welcome any views that Councillor Hunter or anybody else wants to put in regarding the use of evidence once we have obtained it. There are two strands. One is about using the evidence on a crime watch style video to help identify alleged offenders. And there is also a second strand where we'll be publicising convictions, as we do now. As cases come to court and we obtain convictions and we get offenders jailed, fined, and their vehicles removed and crushed, we put that out to the media with names and with photographs. What we're not intending to do is to put that out more widely through the advertising audience that we're going to be using, as we don't want to put businesses or individuals at risk in doing so. But we will carry on publicising that. I also note, of course, that all the details are made public as part of the licensing minutes. There's no secret that we were convicted and the fines they pick up. But if you have any views about whether we should extend that, we're more than happy to take this public consultation. That's it.
Thank you. Any further comments or queries? Not seeing any hands. Okay. So we've got in front of us then recommendations 2.1 to 2.2. Are those agreed? Thank you. Okay. Over to Councillor Chatfield again then. We've got item 16, which is Birmingham 2022 update on PER regeneration scheme for business case.
It is, thank you, Chair. So this report provides a summary of progress made on the delivery of the Peribah regeneration scheme since the previous report of March 2020. And if you haven't had opportunity to go through or visit Peribah, it's quite evident there has been significant progress purely from the rapidly rising skyline in that area. Seeks approval on the updated business case and the incorporated disposal strategy. Seeks approval for additional funding for the internal fit-out works to make apartments ready for occupation and to undertake additional remediation works in the wider Peribah area to prepare land for sale and or development. And those questions.
Right, I'm going to come to councillor. Thank you. Going to come to councillor Upton first, if that's all right, given it's also your area, and I'll come to councillor Mackie.
Thank you. I presume Councillor Chapter is standing in for the leader here.
I am.
I've got a number of questions, but just to take the context of what I think underlies all the questions that I have, and that's a financial issue, which is that currently the scheme as it stands has moved into a deficit of £45 million according to the report. But it then goes on in paragraph 734 to say this can be counteracted by proposed new projects which would raise £64 million, effectively implying a profit could be delivered. Now, we touched on some of the issues earlier in the temporary housing report, and there's a number of issues that arise in this report from different directions. Start with the housing issues, and that 5-year limit on the use of Oscar Gardens is a housing homeless hostel, because within this report there's an implication that a lot of things that could happen on the site would be temporary, that they would then be removed for further density of housing to deliver that £64 million. The Oscar Gardens is one of them. Cabinet member expressed optimism there might be a renewal if it was needed. Overall, I'm just concerned about the way the regeneration juggernaut might work in the future, that if things get programmed in, we will have that site in 5 years' time. We will clear it to deliver the money that's needed for the project. Then things will just disappear very quickly. That's one. Second one is the relationship to the Peribah master plan, which was unveiled for consultation a couple of weeks ago, and which myself and the leader had a discussion about at council last week. And actually, the Peribah master plan contains quite a lot of interesting ideas. I'll be talking later during the summer, working with our ward forum and our neighbourhood planning forum too on some insights into it and some questions around it, but it contains some really interesting ideas. But these ideas are impacted by what's here, and they're touched on here too. So first of all, there's a bus garage, a notorious bus garage, which was closed and National Express relocated to Aston Lane. Now, under the master plan, it's suggested that the bus garage, as it stands, a building could stay in place and become some kind of indoor market and community facility. And I think that's a terrific idea. Absolutely what this new development needs, which is very short on community life and infrastructure. Fantastic idea. Only problem is one of those temporary sites that this document suggests may be erased within a few years' time. Similarly, the Hair of the Dog public house, which again is in this report as a site that could be taken out and replaced with more housing in the future. In the master plan, it refers to it being retained as a heritage site. There's a contradiction between what's been released for public consultation in the master plan and what's coming through in this report. This report pays a nod to all these proposals, but actually it says we must have a plan to have more dense housing in this area to raise that £64 million and cover the deficit. And then we come to the issue of social and affordable housing, because this report takes out 57 properties that want to be passed across to Birmingham Municipal Housing Trust for presumably social housing, and says, well, actually, there's going to be a lot of affordable housing, and it will come on stream much sooner than the new tower blocks that are going up at the moment. Okay, that's okay, but affordable housing is not social housing. We heard earlier the need for social housing, and that's why I was touching on that earlier report as to whether that capital stream of £60 million might actually be deployed to take over some of that affordable housing at a decent price. for the council to turn it into social housing. And similarly, when you look at that temporary housing project, you think, well, actually, this could be a really good site for that, because you could have a whole movement of people from temporary accommodation into social housing on this site in this new community. There could be a lot going on here, but you don't see it here. What you see is take out the 57 social housing properties and put affordable housing, which we know is, there are questions around affordable housing as to what it delivers within the raised flats. So I think all of a sudden the question is, where is the social housing in this project?
Okay, Councillor Matthew, I think that's already next.
It is, thanks very much. Bridget, I mean, Ian always likes to say he's not a road engineer, he's not a lawyer, not an accountant, but, you know, this is one area that construction industry is something where I spent the majority of my life, is what paid the bills, etc. And I think that's where I was going earlier on when I was talking about, you know, we support social housing and support people having a home, but you also always got to be very careful that council itself doesn't skew the market, doesn't break the market, and therefore actually it can end up being less homes being delivered at the beginning because they're sat on that space, not allowing others who are actually better at it to get involved. And for example, this is a really expensive scheme. It's delivering 1,414 new homes at a cost of £539.852 million, or £381,000 cost price per home, the majority of which are flats, right? So, I mean, if you were going to put a profit margin on that and try and sell it, you know, these are some apartments that would be rocking out at about £500,000 if this was the private sector that were doing it. And the majority, and if you were to go look down the road, a one bed new build home on Perry Park View development of the road is valued at 135,000. So that's basically what we've got here is the private sector bringing a house to market for 135,000. Birmingham City Council bringing a flat to market with the cost, if you take all the cost of development, which the private sector will do, £381,000. Right, and this is where I get sort of concerned about when the council get involved in these schemes with the best of intentions, I think, but it's not delivering really what it's set out to. We mentioned the bus garage there. You've got land that was valued at £2 million that ended up being spent £15 million and actually isn't going to be used for what it's going to be used for. So that's a £15 million private market that's going to be delivered there. John says that's what's going to happen to it. And this is our residents' money. This is people's money that's being used for this. You know, and this is how the council can absorb it, just bring out reserves. And that's the reason why I say it skews the market here. Because a private company couldn't afford to do that. It's not sat on the reserves of Birmingham City Council. So, and this is where I get really concerned. There was mention there from John of affordable housing. The Birmingham Development Plan sets out a requirement of 35% of new properties are affordable. And many people in this will always complain when they see private coming to market doesn't have that setting. This development is only delivering 22% of affordable housing. It's not even sticking to its own set of having the 35% affordable housing. When the athletes village collapsed, because it's not going to be used as an athlete's village anymore, Ian said that was a great opportunity to increase the number of affordable homes. But it hasn't done that, has it? Because there's only 22% of this development, not 35% that's being set out here. So what I'm saying is we welcome affordable homes. Everyone's going to have them. We support these scenarios. But I also understand that to bring this to it's not on time, but to try and get it as quickly as possible, resources were diverted from Smithfield and other areas that were going to deliver supposedly affordable housing. So to build these houses has actually meant the council itself, with its own plans, hasn't built houses anywhere. And so you've got to be really careful when you do these schemes. You've got a big headline to say we're delivering this, but is this the best way to go about it, is what I'm saying to the Cabinet. Because from what I'm seeing from this report, I don't think it is.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Alden coming now.
Thank you very much. And this report is really quite interesting. If you were to read it, the way that council have set it out, it would read like the council entered into an arrangement to build an athletes village, and then along came a global pandemic, and really there was nothing the council could have known about to avoid this situation. That's how 1.2 and 1.4 are laid out. Of course, the interesting thing is they're not laid out chronologically, because if they were laid out chronologically, in fact, 1.4 that references the World Health Organization declaring a global pandemic would be before the council signed these papers. Because we sat over the road in the council house on the 17th of March discussing this item after the World Health Organization had already declared a global pandemic a week earlier, raising the exact point that a global pandemic was a significant risk, that the council ought to, if it is going to plough ahead with it, ensure there is a break clause in anything that's signed, so there wasn't any impact on the council budget. And of course, our concerns were dismissed and we were told, no, plough ahead, it's all right. And the thing that's really bad about that is, under someone in the administration's push and authority, the report was exempted from call, so that scrutiny couldn't even give a chance to try and convince the administration that perhaps actually ploughing ahead with this project at that time was wrong. And this is, of course, after the administration had already dismissed the idea of using student accommodation to provide the athletes' village, because of the fact that would de-risk it at an earlier stage and reduce the budget pressures on the council, only to end up having the risk, having the budget pressures, and still using student accommodation for the athletes' village, because the athletes' village won't be built in time. And of course, it also means that when the games are here, there'll be building sites on the land around the games rather than finished schemes, as the council said, promised when it signed it on the 17th of March, a week after the global pandemic period. Now, Councillor Mackey's already touched on the, frankly, eye-watering costs. And it kind of amazes me that all the way through this, no one has stopped to work out what the actual cost per home is compared to what the market rate actually is in that area. And when we've raised this previously, we were told, that the reason why it's more is because of the benefit of having an athlete's village there. Of course, it's not going to be an athlete's village there. So all of that extra cost that was meant to be because it was needing to convert back an athlete's village, and that's why the property would be more expensive, isn't actually an issue at all. Because we're told that they're not even being built as an athlete's village anymore. And so there wouldn't be a conversion cost. Picking up the affordable home issue that Councillor Matthews touched on, and indeed Councillor Hunter as well, what we've got here is a report that was badged to the press as being some grand big intervention by the council to deliver affordable homes. The city actually is a scheme that's 38% less than the Birmingham Development Plan's own plan, says it has to be, so the council own policy is a scheme has to be 35%. The council saying that it can't meet its own policy and is delivering 38% and less, that works out 22% of the scheme instead. And of course, it should be noted that all that's happened here is a few have been brought forward rather than additional ones being added. But that actually doesn't lead to an increase in the amount of affordable homes coming onto the city's radar quicker than would have potentially been able to happen if other policies had been followed. Because of course the council signed up to the two largest regeneration schemes in the city being done by the same company and then allowed one of them to be put behind the other because of the impact of building a Commonwealth Games village. So all of the affordable homes that are planned for the Smithfield site haven't even started work yet because of the agreement to allow that developer to hold off because of concerns about the market. In fact, they could have been ploughed ahead instead of being held up by the Athletes Village at a different route being followed. I think the other point that's really quite interesting, and that's maybe the cabinet member that needs to take us away to have a look at. Councillor Hunt touched on the earlier report where there's a set of money is set aside to buy 230 something properties. And actually about the idea that Councillor mentioned about why isn't that money used for purchasing properties here to provide a better all-on campus feel, if you like, all on one site, and to actually provide benefit rather than then intervening in buying up other properties. And so, I think that idea might have some merit, and I'd ask the cabinet member to take that away and actually look to see if maybe doing that is a better route for the purchases of the properties that are placed.
Thank you. I think that's all the questions. So I'll pick up on a quick governance one before coming back to Councillor Chatfield, and I'll bring in some of the officers that worked on this as well, because there was a lot there. So going back to the points raised around, I think it was 1.4 and 1.1, I think I've got this numbers right. So you're quite right about those time frames. The The catch with all of this is that at the time of that cabinet meeting, we are still bound by the host city contract, which we have signed up to as a city. At the time of taking this forward, we explored student accommodation, I understand, with the Commonwealth Games Federation, which is the body that holds essentially the franchise, if you like, for the Commonwealth Games. And at that point in time, student accommodation wasn't an acceptable solution to an athlete's village. Things have changed quite clearly. The pandemic has had an impact on building, and that alternative accommodation has now come forward as the most workable solution. But that very much was where we were at in terms of discussions at that point in time, is my understanding on that point. I'm going to bring in Councillor Chatfield now, and I'll come on to Phil somewhere. So I can see you after that.
Thank you, Chair. Just myself, Phil's going to pick up some of the detailed questions that have been raised. I would just make a couple of more general points about hand, as you might point out, to the leaders' report, and I'm presenting on his behalf. I would just say, having taken a keen interest in this, I think some of the really positive steps around this are some of them around the use of those temporary spaces. So before we get into the extra development phases outlined here, how you use those spaces rather than just having empty bits of land sat around waiting for development. You use those spaces to increase and enhance the community feel of the site, commercial benefits of the site. And I think that's that's welcome, and I think actually it's a really positive move and actually a clever way of thinking around development. So perhaps I haven't been that smart around previously in the city. The other point I just make is around in terms of cost. And I think it is important to bear in mind, this is a scheme that is not purely about delivering a number of units for a price. It's not widgets. It is the redevelopment of a neglected and overlooked part of the city on a scale that no other city in this country outside London has taken on. And I think that's on a scale that has not been attempted anywhere else in the country at this current time. It is a huge scheme and will fundamentally alter the scope and the scope and interest in Perry Bar, and that then will, and this is all independently verified by companies we use to provide this for. That then uplifts the housing value in the area, and that then brings you future benefits, which hopefully will lead us to a situation of profit, as outlined in paper. But I said the primary driver for this has always been about the wholesale regeneration of an entire swathe of our city, the scale of which I think it's quite hard to get across on paper, but very significant in the flesh if you happen to visit the site and have a look around. That's it, I think, for me. I'll hand over to Phil. I think they'll pick up more of the detail.
Thank you, Deputy Leader, and thank you, Councillor Chapter. Quite a lot of detail points. Clearly a number of changes that have occurred over the last particularly 18 months. I'm going to ask in the detail two colleagues, Alex Phillips on the commercial side, not as a hand from a policy perspective. So through you, Chair, Alex kicks off.
Thank you, everybody. Just addressing some of the questions, Councillor Hunt. We appreciate the point you made about the recently published master plan consultation. And one of the thoughts about what we know as phase 2 of the Perry Bar regeneration scheme, which envelops the National Express bus garage, is that we hope to take the existing outline planning consent for 500 homes and deliver that while retaining the National Express bus garage building, so that the revised repurposing of that building, whether it's for a market or other community uses, becomes an anchor for that piece of the phase 2 development throughout. So, and I think what's important is that what we call sub-phasing of phase 2 takes into account that will be one of the permanent features of that site. So unlike the original plan for phase 1 of the scheme, where the plan was to deliver, as Councillor Mackey says, 1,414 homes in one go, it will be about how we feed those homes to the market in the most viable way, to pick up on your point about skewing the market, I mean, it's important that the council understands that the opportunity there has been sort of bought through the expenditure already with those land acquisitions. Therefore, as phase 2 comes online and it is developed post-consultation for the master plan, that it's then able to be brought forward in the most sort of viable way, not only from a commercial perspective, but from a place perspective, so that there are those vibrant opportunities for local initiatives, businesses, people to live and work in a new place. The point about the hair of the dog as well, which is part of our phase 1 scheme, again, I appreciate that there is a potential contradiction in the master plan documentation versus this paper, but the idea is that it's sensible for the council to take control of the hair of the dog, and if it does in fact deliver more affordable homes, then that can be looked at. We don't think it will at the moment, therefore the master plan says it's better to retain it, but maybe not as a pub use. But maybe it's an alternative use that again supports community activity for the phase 1 elements of the Perry Hall scheme. In terms of Oscar Gardens, again, that will become part of a sub-phase of our phase 2 approach, which we're looking at through the consultation with the master plan. I see it as a minimum 5-year term for that use as temporary accommodation. And to my point about how the phase 2 opportunities are delivered to the market in a sort of sub-phased way, when that piece of the phase 2 land comes online for redevelopment, I expect that to be the last of those sub-phases. So I think it will be there for quite some time. And I think the point about housing delivery on the phase 2 land is that that type of accommodation there's opportunities there for us to create a mixed community that ultimately leads to the most sustainable type of urban places where that type of accommodation can be considered as part of that future piece. So I think the point about densification, delivering more homes on that land is important, but anchored around that new purposeful readaptation of that National Express bus garage, which gives us that really great opportunity to deliver really good community initiatives. I can certainly see some really interesting opportunities for other local institutions like the wholesale markets having a presence there as well. So there's a real opportunity that building repurposing can bring forward. Affordable homes. You're absolutely right about the affordable housing. At the moment, the original scheme was, as I said, to deliver 1,414 homes in one go. Due to the impact of COVID and the change in the strategy for the scheme, we're now delivering 968 homes on the site. That's how many are under construction at the moment. Instead of 11 development plots being live and being built at the moment, we have 4. And it's been important for us to think about how we can bring in the affordable housing targets so that they're able to be ready for occupation as quickly as possible. And the refocusing of what we call plots 3, 4 and 5, which have the consent for 57 homes, we see it as an opportunity for sort of commercial betterment on those 3 opportunities, which doesn't, of course, preclude us from delivering more affordable housing across all of the future development plots that haven't yet come forward, because the scheme is now being done in an incremental way, rather than it all coming forward in one big phase. The way that the modelling for the second phase of the work as well is based on that 35%. So when I describe how the National Express bus garage will be retained, as we develop the ideas based on the consultation through the master plan work, the idea will be that it's predicated on a baseline of 35% affordable housing on that opportunity too.
I think you've covered most of the salient points. So just to reiterate,
the total cost per unit that you talked about earlier on. So the costs that we've incurred so far in the programme have been not just for the delivery of the 4 blocks, but actually for the infrastructure for all 11 blocks moving forward. So the expectation is that when we start to deliver out the remaining blocks that haven't been built out, it will just be the cost of actually introduce the cost of undertaking the works for the whole construction.
Thank you. Right. Councillor Hunt wanting to come back on some of that.
If I may, some clarifications there. I still think that saying the pub is a heritage asset and then it could be replaced by affordable homes or maybe converted into affordable flats. I'm not sure what their thinking is. It is a bit of a contradiction. It's a new community, why can't it have a decent pub? What hasn't been answered is around social housing. So I understood that taking out the 57 BMHT properties takes away the social housing component, and there's been no reassurance given that there will be social housing component unless the housing department moves in separately and buys up some of the affordable homes. Obviously an option. Can I just come back also on Councillor Chatfield's justification for the cost of it as a redevelopment and neglected part of the city? This really irritates me as a ward councillor. It wasn't, parts of it weren't beautiful, parts of it were rather more beautiful than people said. But the problem in Perry Bar was not that it was a neglected part of the city. There were 2 neglected roads down there, and one of them is still in place and still uncherished. The problem was the move of Birmingham City University from Perry Bar, which created a vacant site. And Birmingham City University's proposals for that site were repeatedly blocked by the council, leaving the site derelict until there was going to be an all-age school there. And there's still only a secondary school going on this site, no primary school for this new community, still not a primary school for this new community. So the idea that it was neglected, it wasn't neglected. It was an area which had an issue because the City University moved out of it. And that's fine, it's an opportunity for regeneration that's been taken. But the City University would happily have done that itself, if given the option.
Okay, maybe, I suppose my view would be, I think Perry Bar, and as someone who lived and worked in the area for many years, and with some significant degree of knowledge of it, regardless of the BCU site itself, which I entirely take the point, there was a thriving university on that site until it was moved. The wider area suffered a great deal from the infrastructure developments of the 1960s that effectively drove a, not quite a motorway, but a pretty chunky, great big road through the middle of a pre-existing community. The establishment of a shopping centre that had very poor access arrangements to local residents, and some areas that suffered due to the ownership of private landlords that didn't maintain their properties to the degree they should have done. But yes, I take your point. The actual site itself had a university on it, but it would have quite clearly become neglected had the council not intervened and taken the decision to use that site for firstly for the athlete village, but then for a wider regeneration scheme.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Chatfield, I'm running out of hands, so I'm going to take us to the recommendations, I think. Yeah, not seeing anybody leaping. Right, so we have in front of us recommendations 2.1 to 2.10. Are those agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Right, we've hit 12 o'clock, so I'm going to recommend a 10-minute comfort break, if that is okay, and then we'll crack on with the agenda. Thank you.
Yeah, anything in, so putting lunch and everything.
Right, deputy leads in charge now.
9. Good.
Yeah.
Lovely, thank you. Right, we are back online. Back to the cabinet meeting. We've got to item 17 on the agenda. Item 17 is the Property Strategy Asset Review, Birmingham City PropCo Limited, brackets PropCo. Councillor Chatfield, over to you again.
Thank you. Nearly finished on response. So this report, members will be aware of the existence of PropCo, the council company, group wholly owned company that currently is used to manage 2 hotel sites and delivering income to the council. This report is effectively allowing the expansion of that operation significantly to provide an opportunity to support the council's capital receipts programme to invest in, hold and develop assets for future disposal, and finally to gain best value from selected assets by the disposal of PropCo as an alternative to selling them on the open market. So essentially this again ties back into that delivery plan and our ambitions around assets as a critical part of our plan to reduce future years' deficit and to make best use of asset disposals rather than simply disposing of them to the open market. This report will allow us via PropCo to go through stages of development with those assets in order to ensure best value, whether that be simply clearing the site, securing planning permission on that site, leasing out that asset, or a whole-scale redevelopment, building of asset and then retention of that asset to deliver income into the council. So it's a good opportunity, and this essentially is an enabling report to allow us to do that.
Thank you. And it should be noted that the Group Company Governance Committee has had a look at the structures and governance around this as well, and we'll have it back in front of it at some point in the autumn.
So 1 point of clarification, there is a slight amendment on this report. Section 2.2, the last sentence, the drafting error and that last sentence simply needs to be removed. So with that amendment, like Cabinet to agree to the recommendations.
So that's recommendation 2.2, the last sentence beginning this delegation will enable.
Yes.
That sentence be removed. Okay, everyone's clear on that. Fantastic. Right, Councillor Mackley.
Right, thank you very much. Budget, for a start, in cloud and regeneration team, a lot of time from cloud's a first-class industry professional. I think that as I've said in the other items, I have concerns about when council starts setting up private companies, etc., because when you're getting into sort of companies, you can spectacularly lose an awful lot of money, certainly in this area. So it's an area you've got to go sort of tell you that. I mean, there are private companies who can be taken out at any time through no fault of their own and spectacular losses. But of course, that's just theirs and the investors' money, because that's the way capitalist system works. The council, we're handling our residents' money here, so we have to be very cautious with it. So, I do get concerned. I think that I was looking through here, I think it's all referred to a 5-year business plan. I would suspect with some of the properties involved, I think some of the plans involved, I think I might prefer to see a 20 or 25-year business plan with some of it. I think that, can't remember the publication, but I think one of our officers did an article for an industry publication. It was sent by one of my sort of commercial colleagues, and I wouldn't agree with everything the officer was saying in that article, but he actually was talking for a long-term plan. I was talking about private companies using their calculator and getting in and out of commercial times very, very quickly, which I didn't really identify with that, but I take what he's trying to say. This is a long-term game. So then I was surprised to see the 5-year business plan attached to this, because there's one of our officers talking openly in the trade press about the need for long-term planning. So, which, I don't have problems with that. I do have some bit of governance. I don't know if this is Richard was getting at, but I do have an issue with the governance here, is because we've got senior officers, and I don't know the legals around what a senior officer has to do, but you would think that a senior officer has to act in the best interest of the council at all times. I presume that must be the situation. Those 2 senior officers are also directors of PropCo. The law is quite clear about that, and that tells you that you have to operate in the best interest of that company, otherwise you can get caught. Now, you've got I can't see how those two individuals can have those two roles. We've got to be a conflict of interest there. Because we all in business all aim for win-win every time, but you never, I don't think there's anything of transactions that's ever been win-win 100% on both sides. It's just basically that people's needs and musts overlap and you try and get basically everything you can. So I probably overlead really late at the point, but I've got some concerns about that. And just to widen that out, judging by the high, I think we're talking about Lancaster Circus coming to it here possibly in the future, and I would suggest that there probably needs to be some sort of member cross-party representation on this board, because if we've got large sums of money coming through there, I think there is a need for possibly members to see what's going on. I don't think with members we want to be told as cabinet that oops, something's gone wrong. And after the event, I think we probably need to have a bit of governance over here. Currently we're putting members on boards of bodies currently to see what's going on. So I don't think there's any need for a difference of that cross-party representation. I think people in this room are all on boards of different things that they do because they're representing the council now. I don't think it's a problem, but just one for Cabinet to look at and discuss. Thanks very much, Bridget.
Councillor Alden.
Thank you very much. A number of things I wanted to query. First of all, very much welcome the amendment to 2.2. I would have raised that otherwise. We've moved in the past, and as you know, I've got concerns about having a threshold as high as 25 million. But if that wording remained in place, it might be misunderstood and potentially to be high. So I very much welcome that amendment. I think the first place I want to start is I have a concern that we might be placing some officers in very difficult situations, and unduly so, as an organisation, if not careful through this. So, an officer obviously will have an obligation towards the council to account for best value, etc. If they're a director in this company, they're governed by law around being a director and having to keep their best value in that company. I'm not quite sure how that realistically stands up with what was mentioned in the introduction about basically being able to get a better value to the council with selling assets here, but rather than on the open market. If we're not careful, some officers might be put in very delicate positions, which wouldn't be fair around either having to not get the council best value or purchasing an asset for a value that can't be otherwise attained. So I do think there needs to be really careful thought about what's done to make sure that there isn't a conflict of interest there, and we're not placing any of the council's officers in a position we really shouldn't be as a council. In terms of that point, actually, it then brings me to a concern around how the finances of this stack up. So effectively, we're going to sell property at Popco. They'll fund that by taking out a loan from the council, and we receive income from the loan being repaid to us over time. And that's how it reads, which is what Mitten's done that. But how it doesn't stack up to me is, firstly, presumably, directors would be free to choose to loan money from elsewhere if they find they can actually loan money at a lower rate, because as a director, they'd be obliged to get the best possible deal, not to just take a loan to the council wants to. So that could potentially remove the income source from the council, so there wouldn't be perpetual income in the revenue budget. Then the other issue that might be there is around any clawback on selling it. So we might have an overage agreement that say stands for 10 years, but actually the director of the business may therefore decide that selling that asset within 10 years doesn't give the company best value, because that's the basis of the council. Therefore, they have to follow the best value, which was the director not sell, which would mean you didn't benefit from the overage. And then when you look at the income loss to the council, presumably any asset that they buy, the income that will then not come to the council from owning that asset, so you say it's a block of flats, they're not going to take out a loan from us. That is greater than the income that they receive from that asset, because they wouldn't be able to repay it. So they're only ever going to be repaying less than the income loss on our balance sheet from the building when we own it. So what we're effectively doing here is taking revenue income, reducing it, and giving ourselves a capital number. And in the past, the council's always quite often said that the council has a lot of capital money or can get access to capital money, but the issue is it doesn't have enough revenue money. So it seems slightly bizarre that we'd be looking to pursue a system that reduces the revenue benefit to the council, but increases the capital benefit as a sort of quid pro quo, if you like. So if there's someone who's able to explain if there's something they are missing, or if that's not how it works, that'd be useful, I think, because certainly on reading it, that is how it comes across. And then the last point is around what will be done in terms of ward member consultation before any assets are disposed. Currently, when the council disposes of assets, they speak to members, there's a discussion, let to members about what potential uses, if the covenant should be placed on the land. And that, that's been a really good process. So I can think of examples. There's a garage site that was disposed of in our ward. It worked out really well for everyone because the council consulted, we spoke to the community, the council took on board, the community wanted bungalows because it was within a row of bungalows. The council just told it with a condition that it was only for bungalows rather than for block of flats, for instance, would have overlooked the bungalows. That's a small example, but that shows the real benefit. It works for the council, they get the income, works for the community, works for everyone. So what safeguards will be in there to ensure that before any disposal take place, there is still ward member consultation to ensure that actually we get that local buy-in. That makes getting buy-in with people later so much easier, because if it's a scheme that people want, then actually you don't get the objections that other major schemes might have.
Okay. Right. There's a lot here, so I'll pick up a couple of bits. I'm looking to Satinder just to advise on some of the questions raised around, particularly around the governance issues, if that's okay, and I'll bring in Kristen as well, if that's all right. Oh, and good. Didn't spot you all the way back there. Fantastic. So I'll come to you as well. So, Councillor Mackey, so you raised some of the macro governance questions around private companies in general, which is a very good question because we have seen these go wrong in a lot of places. So Group Company Governance Committee, at its last meeting, took a report on all of the issues that have happened with companies elsewhere in other councils, and we have looked at recommendations made to those councils, and we have benchmarked our own performance style and governance around those. And we made recommendations about where we need to tighten things up to make sure that we don't leave any loopholes that other people have walked through. So it's a good point. It is one that we have taken on board quite seriously. The report done under 316 and 370 does pick up some of the issues you've raised about the role of council directors also being directors on the company board, which we're aligned to. I'm looking, I think, through to Satinder to advise further on if there's anything else you want to pick up on that.
Thank you, Chair. I have to say I'm very grateful for Councillor Alden's point. It does require careful consideration on the issue of potential or actual conflict of interest. So I propose to work with the Director and Cabinet Member to provide some guidance to sit in tandem with the recommendations of this report. If that helps, Chair.
Fantastic. Thank you. Tristan, shall I bring in you next? Or
if I can just pick up a couple of points if I can. Firstly, just on the governance, I think I'll just make a couple of general points. One of them is I think it's not unusual for officers to be directors of companies that have a relationship with the council in various ways. But actually, as Bridget said, I think this is a matter of the utmost importance. And actually, what we've had a discussion in the Group Company Governance Committee around the importance of whether the council should deploy non-executive directors into positions, professional, external non-executive directors. And I would just say, as councillors, I think you're right, there needs to be political oversight, but I think that needs to be balanced with the need that members have sufficient training and knowledge that they can contribute positively, not just in terms of oversight, but also in supporting what that company's ambitions are, rather than just being sat on the table. But in terms of the finances that sit behind this, obviously every individual proposal will have a business case that sits behind it. The point I would also make about the loan value is that essentially because the council has effectively an advantage in the market, we're not offering loan commercial rate. We can borrow money cheaper than a bank can borrow money. Therefore, we can offer a low interest rate onto the company. And therefore, I think it's fairly unlikely they will look for sources of funding from elsewhere. But I say it all comes back to those business cases, and each individual project will be subject to a business case. So that should cover off those issues. In terms of ward oversight, I think ward member involvement. I think that's a valid observation. We'll go away and have a look and see what we can do about that. Again, we discussed that with companies governance when this came up. But I think it's a valid point that it's right that board members should be involved. I would say at this stage, the nature of those assets means they are likely to be, this early point, likely to be city centre or near enough assets. The number of wards implicated are relatively limited at this point, but it is likely to grow in the future.
Thank you. I'm going to bring in Phil before I come back to second round questions. That may answer some of them. So over to Phil.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. So just picking a few points of, I think, governance we've covered off. Just going back to the ward member consultation, what we will need to do is for business cases from the City Council's point of view to actually move those properties effectively into PropCo. So as part of that process, it is actually a delegated office of decision to the Chief Finance Officer. But member consultation council will be picked up as part of that process and recorded. It's not a published decision, but it will be recorded as part of that process. Just on the business plan points, the initial 5 years is around disposals. So that's the current piece of work. And then there's a further actual business plan around PropCo, which is work that's being developed at the moment, which is covering the next 20 to 25 years. So there's 2 pieces of work there. And then just the final point around revenue and the capital. Effectively, any property that does move into PropCo will be a property that would, is likely to be disposed of by the council anyway. If that makes sense.
Okay, did you want to come? Sorry, Tristan first, then I'll.
Yeah, just on a point of clarity, I should stress that the loans that can be offered by law have to be up to commercial rate. So obviously we can offer the bottom end of commercial rate, if that makes sense, the best in the market, but it does have to be consistent with commercial rate.
Okay, right. So you and first, I'll bring back.
Yeah, I was just on this directorship. Yeah, we do have officers who are directors. For example, Simon Hughes is on the board of virtually every sort of entertainment body, the St. Met, City Hall, and his job there is obviously overseeing council's investment, what's going on in those things. He's not actually running those companies, though, is he? I mean, he's a member of the board.
Well, actually, there's an important distinction there between being a member of a board and an observer of a board.
Well,
very different things.
No, okay, I chose my words wrong, but what I'm trying to say is that yes, you're on the board, you have the liability, you're on the board, and therefore you have joint and several liability, etc. You're a liable company, all sort of bits and bobs. So yeah, you have that, and so we have people who do these things, but when you're on the board, you have things that you're not expected to be the financial director. You know, the FD on the board of the company will come to you and will pitch and will explain to you the financial situation of what's going on in that company. Common sense is something that sort of, you can't give people, but at the end of the day, life is not as complicated as people like to make it be, as long as the professionals on those boards are actually doing their legal job and explaining things in a clear manner to those who run the company. So what I'm trying to say is not beyond the realms of councillors with the support that we get currently to be on the board. You can do it. You don't have to. It's not too complicated, but you can't go on it. So that's what we were saying before. We didn't have the skills to listen to that's not very easy.
Councillor Alden.
Thank you. Just to come back on that answer, Phil gave. Phil, thank you very much for saying that the ward member consultation, that's really appreciated, and Cabinet chose to add that in on recommendation 2.2, that'd be even better. I just wanted to pick up the point you're saying about there wouldn't then be a report. I thought when a decision is delegated to an officer and a Cabinet member, there still is a report produced that goes and sees. Can we just get clarity on that? I think that changes it quite drastically if there isn't a report somewhere for the decision.
So if it is officially a Cabinet member decision, and it comes under the criteria for that, it should be a report, to my understanding.
Agreed. Yeah. So can we? Sorry.
I'm sorry. I think I missed the point.
So are we saying or not? Because obviously that's a technical definition rather than a confirmation of the point. So are we saying that in terms of each decision to dispose of a property, as in within the delegation given 2.2, they are considered Cabinet member decisions, so there will be a report, or are we saying they're not considered in that? My understanding of reading is they would, which I didn't mention, but obviously now it's been mentioned, I think I concur.
Apologies if I can correct myself. So it is the report with the leader, with the cabinet member for the officers. So that remains an executive decision which gets posted. So.
Super, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, has that cleared everything up? Okay, and just to come back to Councillor Mackey's point actually around training for members, so it's been a key concern again through company governance that we make sure members are going on to company boards with full training about what that entails, because it's something we've fallen down in the past. So we cannot be making appointments where people have not received the appropriate training to understand their legal duties and what they are taking on and how they're carrying them out. I think that's what we're referring to in that regard. Okay. Not seeing any more hands. So we have in front of us recommendations 2.1 to 2.6 with recommendation 2.2 amended to delete the final sentence beginning this delegation. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay. On to the next one, which is another the leaders' reports, which I'm picking up this time. So this is the East, so item 18 is the East Birmingham Inclusive Growth Programme business case. So you'll be familiar from previous reports with the East Birmingham project. It's a place the size of Nottingham, suffering from intense deprivation and quite poor urban environment and a lack of housing and jobs where they are needed. So this report seeks cabinet approval for a business case for the establishment of the East Birmingham Inclusive Growth Programme, which will begin the implementation of the vision set out in the East Birmingham Inclusive Growth Strategy, which we have previously had to cabinet in February 2021. The business case is for an initial phase of activity taking in the period up to the end of 2024-2025 financial year. Total cost is 3.627 million. And this will provide a programme team budgets to bring forward a comprehensive package of projects for the delivery of the strategy, to secure external resources and funding of the delivery of the programme, and to address some of the long-term opportunities to scale up the programme. Ultimately, over the course of the programme, over the course of the East Birmingham project, they're looking to leave it in round about £1 billion by 2041. So it's an investment here to prime us to start building things, start organising things, to lever in future investment to achieve our goals that we aspire to in East Birmingham. And we have the recommendations in front of us. Are there any questions or comments? I am seeing no hands. Okay. So we have in front of us recommendations 2.1 to 2.4. Are those agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Okay. Arrival for the longest title today. It's a long one. It's starting to the room is really going for them. We've got agenda item 19, proposed in-year variation to admission arrangements for community and voluntary controlled schools, and to the coordinated scheme 21-22 and 22-23, and approach to the fair access protocol. Over to you, Councillor Francis.
Thank you very much. Are asked to approve specific amendments to the admission arrangements for council schools and Birmingham's coordinated scheme as a result of the new school admissions code, which comes into effect from 1st September this year, 2021. The changes made to meet the requirement in the code that children who appear to be admissions authorities who have been in state care outside of England and cease to be in state care as a result of being adopted are to be given equal first priority in admission arrangements, alongside looked after children and children who were previously looked after by English local authorities. Cabinet asked them to approve the in-year variation to admission arrangements for community and voluntary control schools for the academic year 2021-22 and 2022-23. And this is set out in Appendix 1A and 1B. And the in-year variation to Birmingham's coordinated scheme for the academic year 2021-22 2022-23, as set out in Appendix 2A and 2Bs, and as per section 2.11 and 2.12 of the report. Most changes in the code are focused on in-year school admissions and speeding up the processing of in-year applications and admissions, particularly about vulnerable children. As such, I'm also asking Cabinet to approve the approach to making changes in Birmingham's Fair Access Protocol by way of an addendum, identifying the legal requirements of the proposed new school admissions code as they pertain to fair access and is set out in Appendix 3. And the intention to consult on these and further changes with schools. I'm also proposing the delegation of authority to myself as Cabinet Member for Education, Skills and Culture to develop in consultation with the Director of Education and Skills a new draft fair access protocol following consultation with schools and prior to seeking final sign-off from the schools as stated in 2.3.1 of this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Francis. Are there any questions or comments? I'm not seeing any. Okay.
Yes, thank you.
So that takes us to recommendations 2.1 to 2.3. Are those agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay, back to Councillor Francis for report number 20, skills school conversion from community special school to academy status.
Thank you again, Deputy Leader. This report seeks approval for the conversion of Skills School following receipt of a directed academy order in February 2018. The sponsor of the school is the Forward Education Academy Trust. The school is currently located outside of the city boundary in Redditch. Owing to the condition of the current school and the location, plans are in place for the school to relocate to a new site within the city boundary to a new purpose-built school in Glebe Farm Tower Cross Road, as noted in 2.2 of the report. This relocation will take place on 1st of September this year. In order for the academy to operate, a lease will be granted to the Academy Trust in the form prescribed by the GFA. This requires the lease to be for 125 years and at a peppercorn rate. In addition, members of staff that are currently employed by the City Council are to transfer under the 2P Regulations 2006 to the Academy Trust. The statutory 2P consultation process, which needs to take place prior to the proposed conversion date, has been undertaken by the school. So at the point of conversion, Skills School will have an estimated deficit balance of £565,828. And this will remain with the local authority at the point of conversion, as outlined in the treatment of surplus and deficit balances guidance, and that can be found in Appendix 3 of the report. A significant amount of work has been done with the school and the IED to stabilise and reduce the deficit position. I therefore recommend that Cabinet approves points 2.4 through to 2.6 in the report. Thank you, Deputy.
Thank you, Councillor Francis. Any questions or comments on that? Everyone seems happy. Cool. Right, in that case, we've got recommendation 2.1 to 2.6 in front of us. Are those agreed? Agreed. Thank you, everyone. Right, it's back to me. Item 21 is new ways of working. So obviously a year and a bit ago, the pandemic turned the world upside down, and overnight all of our office-based staff shifted to working from home. The response from our staff is that around about 81% of them who have responded to our surveys are enjoying doing that in some way, shape or form, either working from home permanently or would like to work flexibly in the future. We've seen a sort of once in a generation tide change in this. What we did when we shifted to working from home was a very quick solution. If we're going to make this a permanent change, if we're going to allow staff to work flexibly in the future, we need to start building some proper infrastructure around that going forward. The quick fixes we put in place last March were fantastic, and our IT team have been brilliant with that. all of our staff have adapted so well to their new way of working. But if we're going to make that permanent, we really need to start planning properly for it. So new ways of working. The Cabinet paper has come forward to look at how we address exactly that. It's not a property programme, it's not a technology programme, it's a people programme to build things around our staff and to help them to carry out their jobs in our brave new world. So examples of things we're doing are training managers on how to manage staff remotely, which can be a fundamentally different experience to managing people face-to-face in the office. Agile liaison officers even, if I can say that word, to help shift our office accommodation away from banks of desks towards more collaborative space, so that when people do come in, they are spending their time productively, collaboratively, because that's what we've got the demand for. I should say a thank you to our trade unions who've been working closely with us on all of this, because we need to hear their voice throughout this process. And we'll be looking at hybrid meeting technology as well, now that we are legally allowed to meet like this again, which is lovely. There's a whole host of things we're looking at introducing here to make that shift to agile working permanent and to respond to the wants and needs of our staff. I think it's a really exciting way forward. We've tried doing things like this in the past, but they haven't stuck. This time, with the pandemic quite fundamentally changing the mindset and views of what's possible, I think we've got a great opportunity to make working at the council more accessible for more people, particularly those juggling other commitments like childcare, looking after relatives, or living with disabilities as well. Hopefully flexible working to bring extra benefits for such people. I think that's everything I wanted to highlight on that paper, but open it up to any queries or comments. Councillor Murphy.
Thanks so much, Bridget. Yes, well, let's start. First of all, you probably know I've mentioned it before, I've worked at home myself from 1995. It's not without its challenges, but it's also got its benefits. And so I'm supportive of that. If anyone who can work from home, if the council can make that work, that's fine. I have no problem with it. I think it's more about the selling of some of our buildings and assets that go with that. They're coming sort of off the back of it that I sort of raised my concerns about and a bit worried about. I'm a bit worried that some of the sales of some of the active buildings, does this fit in neatly because property services are being asked to find sort of basically some budget input from offloading some buildings. I think Lancaster Circus, as I mentioned earlier, that was discussed being sold in 2019, long before there was any discussions of new way of working or even coronavirus. And so, and what I worry about is that we've got staff who are looking at want to work from home, and that's great that the council can help and support to do that. Should things change in the future and people want to come back for any reason, say they're missing social interaction or they're just finding it doesn't work anymore, if we sell off all our property, etc., are they able to come back to work as they were before? Now, I understand that collaborative spaces are being made available so people can go into rooms, but collaborative spaces, etc., are not the same as having a full desk that you can call your working home, if you know what I'm trying to say. It's your piece of real estate in Birmingham City Council. And so I do have concerns about that. I think that the advantage of sort of being an old man is that you've seen some sort of thing. I've seen it started off where you used to go and see everyone in small offices, and then it was open plan, so I'd go to see people in open plan offices, and then it was cubicles, which I never really understood how this was maybe a good idea, but you'd walk down in these cubicles and then you go and see someone in a cubicle, and then suddenly everyone woke up and realised these cubicles are the worst of all worlds and best of none, and so the cubicles were all removed, and then we went back to open space, and then now we're going to working from home, which, as I say, done well, has it's got its definite benefits, but we suddenly changed away from this, and we've offloaded a lot of buildings. I do have some concerns, and one of those concerns is for new starters. We've had people who, I was told a while ago, had started working for Birmingham City Council at the beginning of the pandemic and hadn't actually physically seen anyone face to face for about 8 or 9 months. And when someone new starts, you need to get people together to sit and integrate. How easily is it going to be for a new way of working? How are we putting something in place that new starters can feel part of the team people have been there for ages, that's going to be dead easy because they know everyone just pick them up. But, new starters, you need to feel valued, you need to be part of the team and supported. And what are we doing with that? And the final bit is that residents, are they going to be able to find the officer that they want to speak to regularly where they are? Because I understand we have a bit of regional hubs where we might have a bit of a sort of almost, I almost mentioned a company, but there are companies that sell off office spaces we can go and we'll have our council version of that or council version where people can pop in and operate. But, if residents want to go and see an officer and interact with them, will they have some place that they'll be able to go, or they're being told to go to different places all the time because that officer is now located out here or they're working out over there today? And will that just lead to our residents being confused and disconnected? I hope not, but it's just sort of why I thought I'd mention that to feed into your thought process.
Thank you. Councillor Hunt.
Thank you. In general, it's the direction of travel for work, isn't it? I want to ask if I can about the section on paper management and this process of scanning and indexing historic documents, which is very interesting. 400,000 documents already under scanning and indexing from the Council House on Margaret Street. Now, are those going to be publicly available when they've been scanned and indexed? What's going to be the policy, if you like, under freedom of information? Because I think potentially for historians and other people, there could be a lot of interest. And secondly, alongside that, is there a policy on previous use of confidential headings on papers? Some items which have been confidential in the past clearly stay confidential forever. But other items that come to cabinet, for instance, need to be confidential, sometimes only for a matter of weeks. And certainly in the past, when there was perhaps heavier use and there was no confidential reports, there are a lot of things like business cases that used to be reported as in the private agenda, which could easily be published now for the benefit of historians. So I just wondered if there was a policy and what was the proposal, because it's actually quite a very interesting project that's underway.
Okay, thank you. I'll pick up a couple of those and I'll bring in Peter when I've done tons of work on this. So first of all, the aim of the future of the workforce is to be flexible rather than fully working from home. Hence, we are retaining the vast majority of our building estate. There are challenges with home working, absolutely. We've seen that with a lot of our staff. And again, that's why flexibility is the key here. It's facilitating people to work in a way that works for them. When it comes to public access to staff or to services, that's not covered by this paper. So that is a separate project where we'll be looking at customer access to services. It's underway, we're looking at it. That's not what this is about. This is more about having staff able to work out of the near office to them. If they happen to, live near Lincoln, not having to go all the way into town if they want to access the space and being able to do that more locally, which saves them time, saves us carbon, and so on. So it's more about back office than anything. When it comes to paper management, so digitising something doesn't change its legal status. If it was private before it was digitised, it's still private. On this one to tell me I'm wrong on that, but yeah, if it was already enabled in a way that was private, it's private. If it was already FOIable, it's still FOIable. But an interesting question with our archiving service about long term, what we do with some of that stuff. Considering this, tell me if I've got that horribly wrong.
No, you haven't got it horribly wrong. Thank you, Chair.
Lovely. Did you want to ask a question, Councillor? And then I'll bring in Peter.
I'm going to take the end one because I've got a number of points to make. I was just looking for you to miss me.
That's fine. Why don't I bring you in now, and then I'll come back on some of those and yeah.
Okay, super. Thank you. Yes, I think the point Councillor was asking was there going to be a review to unclassify some of the confidential reports rather than does their status change? On that similar point, I'm hoping someone is doing an assessment of those documents before they're then binned once they've been scanned on, because there will be some documents which, yes, the council reports scanned on it, you got it. There'll be other documents that either might already have historical value, or maybe the documents that will have historical value in the future. You wouldn't get American throwing away a Declaration of Independence, for instance, just because they're scanning it online. So is someone doing that piece of work to make sure that we are not throwing away things that are then the assets of the city and people living in the future? reassured a bit from what I heard, but my outstanding issue really revolves around this combination of this report is looking at what percentage of staff would like to work from home, which is an important piece of information to get. It's not the only piece of information that's needed. And I find this whole debate quite fascinating because we a few years ago proposed in one of the budget meetings the council ought to work more agile. And the administration told us in outright terms it was absolutely ridiculous, totally unbelievable. No staff could ever possibly work anywhere but in the building. It's quite ironic that they're now saying 80% of staff could work somewhere, not in the buildings, which is way beyond the level. We were stepping back, but anyway, there we go. But my point is that we've got the staff's views, we haven't got the view of people in the organisation about what roles can actually be done remotely, because there is a difference between someone who wants to work at home and their job actually enables you to work from home. That doesn't seem to be in here. We haven't got any assessment of what customers actually need in here either. And I know there are some jobs that the council just hasn't been doing properly since the COVID pandemic started. Now, you can perfectly understand the reasons for that. Some of those reasons are less valid now, it's been so long. But if it was simply to replicate what the council is doing now in the new model, actually that means lots of things the council is meant to do, planning stuff is a good example, simply won't happen because they don't happen currently. And every time a member inquires, the answer seems to be they're not possible to be done remotely because they're not. If they were possible, why is it being allowed to go 18 months instead of that process being put in place after 6 weeks? And it was concerning to hear there's a separate report that picks up some of this customer-focused stuff. So the whole point is this needs to be considered as one. You've got a situation where, take a housing officer, actually it's going to be, depending where a housing officer lives, not feasible for some of those housing officers to work from home. If their home is so far from the part of the city that they serve, they actually can't nip in and out for meeting a resident because that would take out half the day. So there doesn't seem to be any assessment of those actual functionality issues that might turn up. And it wouldn't matter if this was sort of a desktop exercise to iron out all the crinkles. But it's not, because as Lamaki touched on, this report picks up the issue that pre-COVID, the council wanting to sell various hotspots, including Lancaster Circus, which obviously, I know the council's now realised it couldn't sell it quite as quickly because it's got all the issues with CCTV control room, emergency response team, etc. in there. But I am concerned that you've got a situation where when this is done, because of the way it's being done, without the assessment first, either when new staff join and actually aren't able to integrate properly because there isn't anyone being able to do that in person, you guys will have away meetings with the cabinet. I have no doubt that most of those meetings take place in person because you feel like
not
actually are you going to have them all online going forward? Or are you going to be meeting in person?
Okay.
The pause proves my point. That there will need to be integration properly. And that isn't being set out. And I don't want to see a situation where we end up disposing of the office. This Lancaster Circus is an example, but it's disposing of the office like that to a third-party company or PopCo, only to find we then need to rent it back, costing us an additional revenue impact which we didn't have previously when we owned the building, simply because we actually got it wrong and we didn't work at the beginning what the actual need was. As I said, we're very supportive of flexible working, agile working, but it does need to be focused around what the organisation needs as well. And that has to be
to clarify that point, because you did at the beginning criticise us for opposing your plans of flexible working and then have given me 7 minutes of why that wouldn't work. So can I just clarify where we're at on that?
Well, we were proposing a different plan to what you put in here, so maybe if you want to go to just copy our budget, it'll work more effectively. But my point is you haven't actually looked at all the detail here. We're not saying you can't work, we're saying the way you're planning to do this isn't set up to work. It should be amended rather than doing these streams differently. Pull them together and do a holistic piece that takes into account all of those bits at the same time as you make the decision. Rather than making decisions and then later down the line looking at, well, what's the impact on customers?
Okay. So, thank you for reminding us of your budget amendment. From memory, that's 1 or 2 sentences, whereas this is a fully costed plan that we have consulted extensively on with staff and all the business case team with. When it comes to when it comes to things we're not doing at the moment, if offline you can give me a list of where you feel those areas still are, I'd like to see that because restrictions have lifted and where we can safely, we need to be doing things again. I would take it as a very strong given that staff can only work from home or flexibly where that is appropriate for their role. You can't pick up a bin from home, you can't trim a tree from home, you can't visit a home from home. It is the desk-based work that we are looking at primarily here, which is a huge chunk of our council, but also field-based staff, a lot of their sort of processing time and writing up things that they do out in the field. This is about enabling them to do that flexibly, do that in a way that works. In no way should this be creating a situation where anyone cannot do their job. That would be utterly bizarre and pointless, to be honest. I'm gonna turn to Peter here because he's done some of the back huge amount of work on this. Just see if there's anything you want to pick up on that, and Deborah as well. I will come to.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. So this is not a homeworking project. This is about getting people to think and work differently, focusing on outcomes, putting citizens first. It's not relevant to every role. It's not a one size fits all. Absolutely not going to do that. Points about not intending Woodcock Street, people not being able to come back into work. Well, actually, the work we've done on Woodcock Street would suggest, by example, that actually the utilisation of that building can actually be significantly improved, so actually potentially more space available for people. Take your point on new starters, absolutely. The intention is not to push new starters away. People have really suffered from that, and we've taken point about the bringing those people in. This is not tackling face-to-face services, but we do want to reduce people's travel footprint by providing more locality working in enhanced face-to-face centres, but those are going to be subject to separate discussions. The points about paper, well, actually, most of the risk is actually GDPR, actually. So not keeping stuff would have made it worse. We've got tons of documents that are not relevant. There is a full training and assessment process that goes around this to help people understand, help managers understand what is the most appropriate working pattern that puts citizens first in the way they operate. And this is the way the programme has actually been designed. It's not a hot desking project, it's not a property project, it's actually about thinking and doing differently and putting citizens first, managing by outcomes. I said not every role. It's not suitable for all roles, and it's not suitable for all individuals as well. Of course, they have local situations, and we want to encourage that. We are taking a fairly safe route around how these buildings will reopen, linked to COVID guidance, and also bringing our trade union colleagues and everyone with us. You pointed out planning, adult social care, enforcement, those people who are in the field. Key part of the project is what we call that field work, because we want to make sure those field workers have got the information to hand, so that they don't have to keep coming in and out of offices. They can actually more effectively balance their work and their travel arrangements in a more effective way. So that picks up a lot of our problems, and planning is a great example. Where actually we haven't designed things that particularly put citizens first, and we haven't helped our employees to actually work more effectively in the field. So we've really listened to that and putting a lot of effort into reinvesting to help them be much more effective so that they can do their jobs. And just to reiterate, it's not one size fits all. It's about taking active steps. How can I manage by outcomes? How can I organise my work in a more effective way? Put citizens first, and that's at the heart of new ways of working and our sister programme called customer services.
Right, housing was mentioned. I'm going to bring Councillor Thompson, and I'll bring in our head of paid service, since this is something affecting all of our paid service.
Yeah, Richard, I just wanted to make a comment, not necessarily about housing, but just wanted to congratulate you and Peter on the work that you've done in this particular area. It's been a tough time over the whole period of the pandemic. And to be able to do this is sort of almost in live form whilst we're dealing with the pandemic is a huge task to do. And the important thing is that, you know, we would be absolutely criticised and rightly criticised if we did not take the learning from the pandemic, how we should be working more efficiently, how we should be taking in the welfare of our staff, how we should be serving the citizens of Birmingham, and you absolutely grasp that straight out. And here we are in this month of July, bringing about how we can better utilise our buildings. So I think that sometimes we don't congratulate them on that kind of stuff that's going on, because that's really important. It's going to have a huge impact on the way we do these services.
Thank you. I'll make sure that's relayed to all staff that have worked on this to bring this forward. Deborah,
thank you. Just to flag that I've left an organisation that's been doing very similar things, looking at new ways of and actually call it new ways of working. And I would say this plan is as good as, if not better, and certainly is consistent with what other local authorities are doing in the region, because we work very closely together. I think it's really important that we're thoughtful about induction and how we induct new starters. So I've asked for the induction process to be changed and to be much better than it is. I think that's really important. We set the culture right from the get-go. I think it's really important to keep customer focus absolutely at the heart of everything that we do. And I think the point you made, Councillor Mackie, about how will residents be able to track down officers? Well, my view is digital. You can track them down anywhere. There is nowhere to hide. So, but I do accept that where face-to-face meetings should happen are absolutely our priority, and we need to make sure that this new way of working doesn't impact on that in a negative sense. So managers are being trained, retrained, and supported to manage their staff far better within this new kind of concept that we've got. Now, CLT, you know, you pay us a lot of money to manage our staff, and we're doing that. And we've spent a lot of time as a CLT cohort just thinking about how we can make this work. But what I would say, this is not out of kilter with what other people are doing. And I've spent a lot of time with some of our private sector partners as well, understanding how they are changing their target operating model to embrace some of the great opportunities actually that have come out of COVID, alongside other big challenges that I know we all know about. So as your senior managers, we are absolutely focused on getting this right.
Thank you. And just to clarify, when it comes to the calendar, I don't think we've all had an away day since about 2019. You guys can tell me if my memory is wrong. And I'm not convinced we've all been in a room outside of a formal meeting together since March 2020. Yeah, we've embraced the flexibility. There you go. What was that?
And you're now down a cabinet member who's got a failing service.
Now. So, if there's no other comments on this paper, I'm going to take us to the recommendations, and recommendations are 2.1 to 2.5. Are those agreed? Agreed. Thank you, team. Right, that takes us on to item 22, response to recovery.
Right.
No biggie. Over to you.
Yeah. This is the leaders' document, and I am delighted to be presenting it today, and I think it follows on really quite nicely from the other document, because as you all know, with the restrictions lifting or being removed as of the 19th of July, this report seeks to inform Cabinet of the Council's plan to end the current state of emergency on the 2nd of August 2021, subject to specific conditions being met, and the conditions include Birmingham is not subject to any specific local restrictions and enhancement, and support of tier arrangements. There'll be no major issues that have been raised during the 2-week period after the 19th, and during July, at which time the plan is for the council to operate as a post-emergency. There should be post-emergency arrangements in place, and the decision to end the emergency is one that can be made by the Chief Executive Officer only. The council implemented its pandemic plan in January 2020 and has been operating under a state of emergency emergency arrangements since declaring a major incident since March 2020. From the 2nd of August, the council will be able to focus on supporting our residents and businesses to recover from the impacts of the pandemic. This will effectively end the current decision-making under emergency powers, and it will change the governance structure, including the disbanding of the strategic cell, the coordination and response group, and transfer of the ongoing COVID response back into the directorates. The stepping down of certain workforce practices put in place during the emergency. It is important to note that while the emergency would be declared over, the pandemic will persist. And the view is that we will be living with this virus till at least well into 2022, and the report seeks Cabinet's approval for the authority to be delegated to the Director of Public Health in consultation with the Director of the Council Management and the City Solicitor, the leader and the relevant cabinet member to use the COVID-related government funding to respond quickly to future threats from the virus, and in doing so to protect the residents of Birmingham and the wider West Midlands. This delegation would be up to the 31st of March 2022, and on the basis the Director of Public Health will provide updates to Cabinet at least every 2 months on the progress, decisions taken and spending in relation to the associated budget and funding stream. This report is really important because it also seeks Cabinet's approval for the authority to delegate it to the Managing Director of the City Operations in consultation with the Director of Council Management, the leader and the relevant cabinet member to use the £2.5 million that has been awarded, and under the National Leisure Recovery Fund to support the council's key leisure partners who have been significantly impacted by the pandemic. And again, this would be on the basis that the Managing Director of Operations will provide quarterly updates on spends against the £2.9 million fund awarded. I'd like you to approve this, please. Thank you, Lord. Deputy Leader, if there are any questions.
Obviously, by the end of
Are you trying to drop over to you some sort of subliminal hint? Should we go?
I apologise. Over to you.
Thank you. This is quite a landmark moment, really, considering everything that's happened over the last sort of 15, 16 months. And I don't think it should be underestimated, just what everyone's been through to get to this point. I'll open up to any comments or questions regarding it. Councillor Hunt.
Thank you. Just one question about the paper, because you referred to the stepping down of certain workforce practices put in place during the emergency. It's not very clear which workforce practices are being stepped down, particularly in view of the move to agile working now. So clearly, a lot of what's been put in place is going to be retained. Secondly, a question related to this, if I may, and that is the council involved in discussions and talks about getting staff designated as key workers for the purposes of being exempt from self-isolation for double vaccinated? I presume there must be something going on in social care, but I wonder about more broadly, perhaps refuse collection crews as well. That's been severely impacted by the problem of self-isolation, I understand. So what is going on in that respect?
That's a very good question. I'll bring in Councillor O'Shea and Rob James to answer that. That's all right.
Thank you, Deputy Lord Mayor, Chair, whatever you call you today.
Degree me then.
I'm not aware of any discussion at this stage about designating council staff as exempt on the terms that we were going to put forward. Post that we put forward back in last week envisaged particularly key workers being designated and is on a named basis. So it would not be on the basis of designating our entire legislation team, for example. I think the government put forward was about a number of staff working in a key critical role in railway signalling infrastructure. And they actually said that would not include train drivers. So I would envisage if we had a member of the early staff at the TICERF who was key to operation of that facility, the safe operation of the facility, then they would approach DEFRA and they would raise a cabinet office to get that particular person, it's a named individual, give exemption should they be pinged. But the scheme thus far will not cover the rest of the crews. I know there's been more stuff put forward in the last 24 hours about improved testing, but we now have a look at that. The stage can't comment on that, but this is too deep.
Thank you. Rob, do you want to add anything to that?
Thank you, Deputy Leader. And just to support Councillor O'Shea on that, we are reviewing the guidance issued on self-isolation. At the moment, as Councillor O'Shea says, it's more likely to be the operation of waste disposal plants rather than the collection of refuse. And to answer Councillor Hunt in respect of workforce practices, we are reviewing those where we perhaps interview members of the public. A lot of that has been done over virtually over the last sort of 18 months, but members of the public are requesting sort of face-to-face meetings again. So we are doing that, for example, within our neighbourhood advice and information service by appointment only. So, you know, we're reviewing all of our practices that we have changed over the last 18 months to see whether we are actually meeting the needs of our customers. Just to add on the isolation issue, we're also reviewing the critical workers with either adult and children's social care to see whether there is any exemption there. I don't know whether Graham's got any further information on that, but we've had the guidance, we'll review again.
Okay, great. Do you want to comment further on that?
Yeah, I mean, just to say that, I mean, there have been murmurings around the whole range of essential work. In reality, the focus is really mainly with healthcare workers. So imagine an ITU unit that could fail if we want exemption. There's that sort of thing. So we're trying to use the staff there. I think even in areas like social care, it's unlikely we would use them because of the nature that we've got enough staff to cover. If someone, you know, a child being infected, there's always someone else you would call, whether we are dependent on that one. The other thing is that adds to this is that the individual employers need to sign it off. It comes under the Director of Public Health, so to be absolutely honest, it is a bit shambolic at the moment, just being clear, but we are working very carefully to ensure that there are any need to use this exemption well. At the moment, I've checked this morning actually with more staff. We're not under that kind of pressure.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton, did you want to come back?
I think it's been answered adequately.
Lovely. I've realised Councillor Orban has to have and Councillor MP. Right, 1, 2.
Thank you. And just on that, I appreciate the comments said about waste workers. They're definitely our category on it. So I mean, I think it's certainly worth investigating whether drivers, because obviously the loader doesn't take out the whole crew, but if the driver can't do it, it doesn't matter if the rest of the staff there. We weren't looking at that. We haven't already looked at that. In terms of I think I'll start with where Paulette touched on it, and absolutely right to highlight the distinction between what this is, which is ending the state of emergency as a formal process for how to govern, and it being any comment on the pandemic agreement, where we all say that is. So absolutely spot on with that. And it really is right to emphasise that. I think it's also right at this point just to we said earlier, but also just to thank all the staff. Again, between, so this is every cabinet meeting over the last however many months, between 20 months, but it is worth just saying again for everything they've been through. And indeed, it tells you how long that 20 months has been, because this is, I think, the fourth, effectively, I think you've done it twice now, fourth chief executive we've got during this period. So it is good now to be in a position where we are actually returning back to the governance process that's meant to be set up in the city. And I think the thing that's missing from this report, I do welcome the changes that were made in the drafting of it and the following of comments from Councillor Rice at the screen. I think they were good amendments to make, but there doesn't seem to be any mention here about what's going to be done around lessons learned. And obviously that's a really key aspect. It's actually the formal part, I believe, of the emergency process, declaring state of emergency anyway. The conclusion you have to do a lessons learned to see what can be done. And I would ask, as part of that, if it also looks at actually did it need to go on as long as it did, as Councillor touched on in our instruction, no one is saying the pandemic's over, but actually state of emergency got to get you past the worst of it, not as to be a day-to-day how we run the city. I don't think anyone envisions those powers would ever be used for 20 odd months. And so I do think there just needs to be a review of, it might be that review finds actually there wasn't any other options. But it might be that in future there's a process that we put in place to, even if it's just unwinding some of it earlier, so that the governance structure that's meant to take place in democracy is able to take place.
Yeah, I'll bring in Councillor Mackey, and then I'll bring in officers to respond to some of that stuff.
Yeah, it's something prompted by actually John's question and some of the players, Councillor Shea and Bob Jones, is that, we've got a lot of key workers who are coming into contact with people. One of my friends who now says about 60, big influence on me, big, never been together, he's a big fan of it, explains to me, I feel I've been there, and he found out on Saturday in the house, died of coronavirus, having an injection was not for him, he didn't listen to anyone, because he didn't feel it was comfortable or safe to do so, and I was just wondering what we were doing for our staff here, basically encouraging them to have the injection, because these are lifestyle injections. I know there's concerns that people make, but I think that it's been through the injection is safer than not having it, so to speak. This is an individual who's a gentle giant, fittest get out, to me, and was found dead on Saturday. And you think of all the people and staff that we have here who come into contact with people, I think we have sort of explaining what we're doing to make sure they're getting their injections so that they can be kept fit and safe when they're interacting with people in this city.
So first of all, I'm incredibly sorry to hear about your friend. That is what we were trying to do. We have been doing all we can to push the message on vaccinations and to get those out to as many people as possible. I'll bring in Councillor Hamilton in just a moment, because not only has she been leading the push, she has been quite literally vaccinating people herself. So let me bring in some officers first, and I'll come to Councillor Hamilton to wrap up on this. Right.
So again, I'm really sorry to this, but one of the things I would like to reassure you about. So Sajid David Spad is holding Birmingham up as an absolute exemplar in the way in which we are not taking our foot off the accelerator and continuing to be relentless about going into communities in the right way and encouraging people to take their vaccinations. So Councillor Hamilton is viewed as a national lead on some of this as well as from an officer level. And I think it's absolutely right. So we're still working hard with our own staff, but more importantly, we're going out into those, most deprived and most hard to reach communities and being quite relentless about that. Now, there's a view in the paper today about that, this will all be over by October. I don't buy that, and certainly the work that we're doing on the Commonwealth Games, we're being absolutely focused on making sure this city is the safest city it possibly can be by the time the eyes of the world will be on us. So we're absolutely focused on all of that. The other thing I would say is that we are bound by the Civil Contingencies Act. So if there is another spike, we have processes and governance arrangements that can very easily be stood up over, within a matter of hours. Now, we don't have a lot of leeway about what that looks like because it's set in statute, but we do have flexibility around the margins about how we as a council respond to that as well. And as I've been in goal control for many years, so it's bread and butter to me, and I'm absolutely confident and clear that the organisation is in a position to respond when necessary.
Thank you. I've got Robert wanting to come in.
Yeah, just in response to Councillor Alden in terms of lessons learned. So during the course of the last few months, we have had a review of our local outbreak management plan. We will be doing a lessons learned exercise, which will get looked at independently from the officers of the council. So we will get a report on that. And just on standing down of our emergency governance structures, you'll recall that when we stood up the traditional governance structure back in March of 2020, we ran that for a period of time up until January 2021, when a lot of the activities in response to COVID went back into directorates. And really, we've run that for a few months now, with directorates picking up the vast majority of the response. But we are, really aware that we need to move into the recovery phase of the emergency, and this is what this paper does for us to enable us to move into that recovery phase. So we've stepped off a little bit, if you like, in January with the whole sort of governance structure and the traditional structure, put things back into directorates, but now we feel the time is right with the lifting of restrictions to go into business as usual, as it were. And I have to say that we are in line with other local authorities and in the region where we are standing down some of the regional forums around the response to the pandemic. So I think we're in line with everyone else. So I just recommend that we go forward with the proposal.
Thank you. Councillor O'Shea.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. Just to respond to Councillor Alden, and just to stress that the government guidance is very clear. Any exemption on leaving home if you have been identified as close contact of somebody with COVID is contingent upon need for you to perform a critical task. The government guidance doesn't actually says that it is not there to remove all disruption that will be caused by people being quite self-isolated. It is for named individuals where they have been vaccinated and they are 14 days after the second vaccination. They identify somebody in close contact with somebody who is COVID positive. We have to make a case of DEFRA. Cabinet Office and DHSC then agree whether that person could be permitted to come in solely to come into work. They have to isolate them at home. And they will also put in requirements for any additional precaution they take to isolate them at work. So again, you can see there are cases in safety critical, and the government are clearly these are safety critical and national security critical operations that impose a risk of life penalty for. where that be possible. I get referred to the capacity operation of the grab that Tyson might be an example where that could apply. I really struggle to see how we can to our driver force when they also have to work with other crew members in the same vehicle. And we can keep them safe. We will keep this under review. We will look at what the most recent proposals are from the government regarding increased testing. But above all, we have to keep our workforce safe, keep people in the city safe, and we don't pretend there will be no disruption to our services. There has been and there will be in the future. We are like every other authority in the country in that respect. But we'll do our best to minimise the effect on the people in the city. And again, especially we have managed to deliver a household waste collection service that has been largely unaffected over the past 18 months, in contrast to other local authorities, even in the West Midlands.
Councillor O'Shea. Right. See any more hands? I will bring back in Councillor Howard.
I just want to thank everybody for actually all the comments and the questions, because I feel that they were all important. I just want to start by saying to Councillor Mackie, I know where you're at, because it's happened to me, and it's not a nice place to be when you think, what could I have done? But sometimes there is just nothing you can do. I went on a mission with public health many months ago that I was going to tell the world. Sometimes the backlash you get because you have those that are passionate and those that are not so passionate, you have to balance it. So as a council, I believe we've absolutely taken the right steps at the right time. I believe that it is the right thing to come out of the emergency measures at this time, with the view that if in the future we need to step back into it, we put all the checks and balances in place, that we can do it straight away. I believe that we have really looked after our staff, and we have really made sure that we have kept them safe over the last year. I hear the issues relating to ensuring that they're vaccinated. At the moment, this is a free country, and we can only educate, encourage, persuade. I've done videos, we've gone on road shows in the community, we've knocked doors, counsellors have been out there at different vaccine centres. We as a council across party have done everything we can, and we continue to push, and that's all we can do. So all I can say to you is, I believe that the way we've gone forward is the right way. I believe it's a way that our chief exec, our leader, appropriate cabinet officers, appropriate chief officers can really monitor what's happening and step into gear if we need to do so again. But read the public, all I can say is continue to push around the issues of vaccine. Continue to get your young people to go and take the vaccine. Get your parents, or if you're parents yourself, grandparents, if you're grandparents, to get the youngsters to take their vaccine. Because let us be honest, that is the way to get out of this. And just finally, to absolutely agree with the chief exec, I don't believe that things will just stop in October. The autumn and winter will be very challenging, but the benefit will be that we've had the first round of all the vaccines, the boosters will be coming, the flu vax will be coming. I am absolutely going to be part of that programme, because I want to be part of the change, not just saying we shouldn't do it. So as a cabinet, as an extended cabinet, we continue to push in every direction to ensure we keep the citizens of Birmingham safe. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you, Councillor Howard. And thank you for everything that you've been doing on this. You know, it's an extraordinary effort just from you personally, not just leading your role, but you're literally out on the front line volunteering vaccine effort, as well as leading it, you know, leading some of this push actually with the LGA. It really is incredible.
if I can just absolutely echo that comment. I know it's incredible. You've had the advantage of having been trained already to be able to give injections, but it's quite incredible going out and be able to lead from the front, particularly demonstrating to commuters and perhaps be more excellent. It's absolutely very well done.
Can I just say, when you see death, and when you see the amount of despair, you do it.
Especially with children and things like that.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. Right, I'm going to wrap up this item. So we've got recommendations 2.1 to 2.3 in front of us. Those agreed? Okay. Terms of impact, I think that's one of the biggest ones on the agenda, given where we're at the moment. So, we've done item 23, Child and Family Weight Management Services Grant. That leaves us with item 24, and procurement activities August to October. Following on from earlier agenda item, I think it's interesting to note that this is our longest cabinet we've had in a very, very, very long time. Don't we all know it right now? But we've only had one exempt appendix on this entire agenda, and it is here where it needs to be. So I just thought that was worthy of note, given where we've been in the past. Councillor Chatfield.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. So yes, this is the Plan Procurement Activity Report. Standard report, things within the delegations officers have spent our money on. Of course, willing to take any questions if you have.
Any questions, Councillor?
Yeah, that was a surprise from the same hand. The two things really. First of all, was some questions about the fountain actually. One, is it working? Does it need more work? And if so, how much more work does it need, and how much is that going to cost? And the other one was, I think it's showing so much that Ian's not here, albeit Fridge is doing a fabulous job. Replacing. I was going to go possibly. No, I was going to say, because could this be a long-term replacement that we're looking at? But but I think we've got. I was going to talk about this reference in there to sounds mundane, but the poles that are going into Symphony Square, Symphony Square, sorry, outside Symphony Hall. I think I had invited in to a meeting once to have a look at it, but it's kind of a busy man and couldn't make it. But the poles themselves have a cost involved to them. I'm not going to mention it because that would then take us into private session, but there's a cost involved. Those poles themselves are controversial. One is across the entrance to the ICC, two are outside the Symphony Hall. Again, one of them is across the entrance/exit of Symphony Hall, and one is on the corner of Symphony Hall onto Broad Street, and they all had their issues with them. When I raised the ones that are outside the entrance and exit of Symphony Hall and ICC, the response that came back was, well, they're within fire exit. So, okay, if you were trying to have an exit from that building, and let's say there's a fire or whatever reason you're trying to get anyone out quickly, and they're going to be confronted with a pole, okay, their distance may be far enough that, but anything that gets in the way is going to be in the way. And I don't really see why these poles actually need to be there anymore. Symphony Hall don't want them. The ICC don't want them. There was initially supposed to be one outside the Hyatt. There was going to be one there until the Hyatt turned around and said, actually, we own that land and it's not going there at all. And so there is no symmetry now to having these poles because there won't be one over there outside the Hyatt. There's a cost involved to it. No one wants these poles there. And all I was going to ask was just to appeal to the good nature of the Cabinet. And even in the past, this I was here because when I had to chuck these Hail Mary passes to him, he asked quite often, said, I'll take it away. And you could explain, I am willing to be persuaded. And this is one of these occasions where I'm asking, can we go away and have a look at those? The symmetry is not there anymore. It's going to be cost a fortune and a nightmare because of all the services with the tram coming in to get the last one there. I understand that the foundations of it still haven't been fully laid and implemented yet. But even if that is the case, there's still a cost of putting them in. And so could I just ask you to have another look at that and have another think?
Okay. I know Ian is quite passionate about this square, so I will relay your comments to him, and I have no doubt he will he will take this up himself.
Thank you.
Councillor Walden.
Thank you. I wanted to bring up the SCN on the organisation that delivered the Great Birmingham 10K and half marathon. I was hoping the coming member might have an update, because I believe this was actually raised with him at scrutiny. But the report says it's a single contract negotiation because there's only one provider, but it doesn't take long to be able to find at least 11 providers, people who run events like the London Marathon and the Manchester Marathon, which I'm assuming we're not saying are not acceptable comparisons. So I'm hoping the government might have an update. You seem to be nodding.
It's funny you should say that. I do happen to have an update. Yes, it was raised by Councillor Jenkins. Yes, and I did commit to taking it away and having a look, and I have been providing you information that has satisfied me that the Great Run Company offers can make an offer that is not widely available in the market and is the only provider that can make that offer. Not just a few things, for example, they've got access to corporate partners. They've done work with big HSBC, Lloyds, JP Morgan. They also deliver community running events as well. So there's a whole scale of here. They also have access to a database of 600,000 runners of various levels across the country. So you've kind of got your sort of national marketing strategy kind of all laid out and ready to go when they sign up. They also it's a unit in terms of provision of services to athlete procurement and TV and broadcast production. They can offer in-house broadcasting production capabilities, which will be key to the development of the Great Birmingham Run, and also because of the rollout of early 5G, that ties together with producing really innovative around the production values as well. So as you see, there's also it's also part of a broader partnership arrangement or part of a partnership sort of negotiation discussion we've had with this company for a number of years that's led to a sort of close relationship that has delivered really successful events in the past. And as I said, I am confident that there are enough reasons to justify this being an SCN in this instance. But yes, as I said to Councillor Jenkins, I'll take it away, and I have done so, and that is the information provided, which I said satisfies me.
Okay, satisfying you on that point.
I think you've given reasons why they want to want a competitive centre. I'm not quite sure I'm convinced, but like the London Marathon, they don't have television coverage and don't have access to global media in terms of sponsors. So I accept it's your prerogative to decide to go ahead with it.
Okay. Also, leader isn't here. Again, just one of this passion project, so if you want to pick it up with them outside, give you any further information. Right, any other comments on procurement activities going on? No, gone.
Just make one quick comment if I can. Of course, I'm sure the leader would arrange for Councillor Walden to take part in any of these mass participation picks, should he wish to do so. Well, that's completely open to that. You'll even get, I'm sure we can arrange a free ticket for you.
Very much. Actually, I didn't correct this one.
Okay, we can discuss this afterwards. Right, so we've got recommendations 2.1 in front of us. Is that agreed?
So are you including the poll?
I'm including the poll, but we're having a follow-up conversation with Ian about that subsequent to this meeting. Okay. Don't run just yet, we've got one more. 1925 appointments for outside bodies. Is that agreed? Any questions on it?
I was just wondering if you go to a cabinet appointment as well at the same time.
I'm not the leader, and the leader just like the names. That one role today. The leader is the one who makes it. No questions on outside bodies. No, is that recommendation 2.1? Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Any other items of business? Lovely. Thank you so much, everyone. It's been a long distance to count that item.
We'll find out.
Is that usually?